All right, thank you, Dusty. Well, I'll get us called to order. It's good to see everybody again. This kind of feels like first day of school all over again. And to that order, Jenny, I already goofed up. Where did I put my agenda? Thank you. So I want to welcome everybody back, and we're going to get kicked right off with our review of the statutory charge, and that will be by Revisor Long.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of Task Force. Jason Long with Office of Revisor Statutes. As I am sure the Task Force is well aware, the Kansas School Equity and Enhancement Act expires on July 1st of 2027. And the Education Funding Task Force was created by statute back in 2024 to review that act and any potential changes to the act. The charge requires the task force to submit a report to the legislature and the governor by January 11th of next year, so January 11th of 2027, and shall include recommendations regarding whether or not a new school finance formula should be implemented to replace the current School Equity and Enhancement Act. And in reviewing that and making recommendations, the task force is directed by statute to make recommendations for the following goals: ensure that the formula is reasonably calculated to have all students meet or exceed the educational goals that are established in statute, that the formula provide adequate, consistent, and reliable school funding, that the formula provide equitable school funding, and that the formula provide meaningful accountability measures. The task force is also directed to consider revisions to the current methods for determining and dispersing special education state aid, and then make any other recommendations related to school finance. And so that is the statutory charge of the task force. I am happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Director Rooker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason, with regard to the first goal that you cited, the goals for academic achievement, I think there is specific statute cited as existing statute that outlines those goals. Can you walk us through what that section of statute
yes, it is. It does specifically cite the KSA 72-3218C, which are the what is colloquially known as the Rose capacities from the Kentucky case on academic goals. I can certainly provide a copy of the statute to the task force for a reminder.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions for Jason? Dr. Hartwood.
Actually, mine's not for Jason so much, but I just noticed that Representative Brantley was here and Representative Getz wasn't. So is that a permanent change or just trying to figure out? Because Representative Getz was a representative as a parent, not as a member of the House. So I just making sure we have all the right representation.
Thank you. I had not noticed. Are you substituting today?
Madam Chair, I'm substituting today only. He'll be here tomorrow.
Any other? Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Jason, to follow up on Director Rooker's question, this may be more for Jennifer and Matt. Can we get, since that statute was implemented, can we get an update on the progress made since that time on the Rose capacities?
Jason, I'll direct that to Matthew and Jenny. Could you be more specific in your request? Are you looking for how we've done, have our state assessments improved or other metrics, or what all would you like to see in that?
Well, the Rose capacities are very specific in what they say students should know and be able to do. Can we get an update on where we were at when that statute was implemented versus where we are now? In other words, we were directed to make improvements on the Rose capacities. Have we since that period in time? That's what I want to know on all the Rose capacities.
And how many you'd like from inception to current?
From the time the statute was enacted till now.
Okay, Matthew?
Madam Chair, Senator, we will look into that and see what all information we can gather for you.
Thank you very much. I think that would be interesting. Certainly, I think it's easy to, not easy, but quicker to look at the first year and the current year. If it's possible to get that by tomorrow, that would be great. But I think looking at a year by year on each of those factors would be helpful. I doubt we'll be able to get that tomorrow, but just sometime in the future, that would be very interesting. Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just looking at the rows capacities, and some of these are not necessarily going to fit nice and neat on a chart, like sufficient grounding in the arts to enable them to appreciate their cultural and historical heritage. So I am kind of feeling for our legislative researchers right now for such a broad ask. So I agree, like narrowing it might help with their workload.
We'll do the best that we can, and it sounds like that might be an interesting agenda item in the future. Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to that point, how are we measuring that? If we're being held to that standard, how are we measuring all of the rows capacities? So if we don't have the data, so to speak, that fits nice and neat on a chart, how are we gauging that? How are we measuring progress on those areas? Thank you, Madam Chair.
I think that's a good question. All right. Any other discussion on the task in front of us, which is to review the review of the charging statute? Seeing none. Jason, thank you. You may have a seat. We appreciate that. We are going to have Matthew now give us the report of the Ed Funding Task Force that was given to the legislature in January of 2026. We did look at this document, if my memory serves correctly, before we left, but it's been a while, and I think it's a very good jumping off point. So Matthew, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the task force. Again, I'm Matthew Willis, Principal Research Analyst for the Legislative Research Department. So all of you should have a lovely paper document, says Report of the Education Funding Task Force to the 2026 Kansas Legislature. This is a broad summary of kind of everything that you all talked about, that was presented on, and everything like that last year. So I'll just kind of go through, touch some of the high points, and since we will then be going through overviews of all of the different models and everything, we'll skim over most of that since we'll be going a little more in depth. So I will first start off by a reminder that the task force had no formal recommendations to the 2026 legislature. As Jason just noted, you were not required to do so, but there were no recommendations. And so for last year, and so again, this is very much a kind of summary document. We'll start off that the task force met for a total of 13 meeting days last year. There were several during session in January, February, and March, and then we had kind of those back-to-back meeting days in May, June, July, August, and September, just to kind of refresh your memory. So at the February meeting, we did begin by just going over a lot of the current school finance funding. We discussed the legal max document that KSDE puts out that helps show the calculations for school districts under the current formula. We discussed all the various weightings and had printouts distributed that showed each district and kind of the amount that weighting comprised of their overall. There were also various times throughout the session in March and May mostly where KLRD and some others presented on some 50-state surveys, as well as information on school finance in other states, such as Arkansas, Colorado, Iowa, Missouri, Nebraska, and Oklahoma. Again, all of these documents are available on the testimony online. If there is anything specific that at any point you are wanting to go back and review and are struggling to find, please reach out to Jennifer, myself, Nicole, any of us, and we'd be happy to get them for you. With the other states, we both discussed it broadly in how they finance, and then as we'll discuss later in the other section, we also spent a lot of time with special education specifically. We also detailed over the course of several meetings the different student weightings and then models of what potential changes could look like to them. We began that in kind of May and June with some of those discussions. And then you will see it kind of notes under each weighting section what meeting day or meeting days we discussed it, as well as a list of those models. Again, most of them we are going to overview here later this afternoon. The two I will draw your attention with, though, is on page 7 of the document for transportation weighting. We did spend some time primarily at the June 3rd meeting discussing how the transportation weighting works, kind of what information is available, how some other states determine their funding for it. But that is one weighting that there have been no models, additional models provided for, or anything like that. So just to kind of draw your note there. The other one would be on page 10 for the career and technical education weighting, or CTE. September, on the September 3rd meeting, we spent a while at the meeting KLRD provided information, and the task force kind of discussed how some of those programs work, what all is entailed there. But that is the other one of all of the weightings we've discussed where there is no like alternative or just models that have been produced. So when you're looking at those two, they do not have any corresponding kind of exploratory models. And then moving on from weightings, then the other large section of this is noting the task force's discussions and research around special education. And so as you'll remember, in May was when the task force first discussed special education, and that's where there was a variety of some memos about how other states handle it, as well as just some kind of high-level discussion, within August being when we dove into providing some different models of taking other states' formulas or kind of structures of how they do it and kind of overlaying it onto Kansas just for some ideas. Again, we will, the special education model specifically, will be covering tomorrow. I'd also note on page 11 that on the September 4th meeting is when the special education working group that the task force had asked KSDE to facilitate did come and provide some of their feedback, their recommendations, as well as a couple models or ideas that they had as well. And a bit of that is summarized at that part of the page. Additionally, as I noted, we kind of discussed some other states, had some presentations on high-cost special education funding. The task force also had some presentations from the Division of Legislative Post-Audit regarding at-risk expenditures. The KSDE came and provided an update on a survey that they had done at some of their workshops, an update on the at-risk accountability plan pilot, as well as KLRD had a variety of some presentations, specifically in September, on career and technical education, virtual schools, student enrollment trends, as well as some district fiscal and finance information. One element I did skip over that I want to go back and touch on before wrapping this up is on page 6 at the very beginning of that student weightings and models. There were, while they were not done in in a formal recommendation sense, I did want to draw your attention at the bottom left where the task force in its discussions kind of before beginning that did have some elements that I believe the term we used in the ICR was kind of generally agreed upon, or such as using the tenets of the 7 norms of collaboration and discussion, but then also centered around the Education Commission of the State's K-12 funding toolkit, regarding a funding formula being transparent, student-centered, adequate, fair, and sustainable. And then the task force also generally appeared to agree upon the idea of maintaining any changes being maintained as a student-based funding model. So with that, I'm happy to stand for questions on the report.
Matthew, thank you very much. Do we have questions for Matthew about what was in the report? Okay. Matthew, thank you very much. Before we get to the next part of the agenda, we had planned, I just kind of wanted to touch base on discussion. I think you guys, if you watch me, you know I run a fairly tight committee. I think we have our best conversations when we are respectful to each other. We don't make things personal, and we are open to sharing ideas and thinking outside of the box and taking the time to understand the things that we are thinking about. And so I want to head to discussion, and the discussion that I wanted to head to was taking off from page 14.6 and that student weighting and models. And Matthew just went through those guiding principles that we had agreed, that we had centered on, and see if there were any that, now that we're at this point, we wanted to talk about any of those, or we wanted to add any new ones. For example, I'd like to throw out the idea of making sure that we phase this in. And that might be an important principle, but before I get to my thought, if we can, I wanted to give the group time to just kind of share your thoughts on the guiding principles we've adopted, or others that you might like to see. Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to follow up on yours. So when you talk about phasing in, you're talking about the legislation would be for a change in the K-12 budgeting would be a phased-in process over several years.
However we land on, but just not an overnight flip of the switch. Give districts a chance to adjust to what we do.
Thank you.
Dr. Harwood.
I know that predictable gets talked about a lot. I don't know if that made it into the actual agreements we made, but the bigger the change, the more important the phase in is, just for predictability. So I agree that we talked about this a little bit at the end of last year, is that if there are really big changes, then I do think there has to be some time, especially if the legislature doesn't decide on this until March of 2027. The other issue that could come up is that depending on what happens, we may not actually be collecting the data now that some of the funding formula could be based on. I don't know what that would be. I'm just talking about it could be, so that you might have to have a year to phase in so you can collect the data in order to be able to fund it the next year. So I agree with this, with the phase in part. I think it's going to be difficult to talk about how long that needs to be until you know how big the change is.
Correct. I would be very hesitant to settle on what a phase-in needs to look like, but I think it's something that's important. Representative Williams.
You, Madam Chair. So when you talk about those key things or guiding principles, there are just two things that really come to mind. Number one, in the statute related to the task force, it says that the formula shall provide meaningful accountability measures. And I think that's going to be a tough bar for us to fulfill, but I think it's something we cannot lose sight of. And that includes not incentivizing the things we don't want. So I think we'll have to be very cautious that we're not giving more dollars to behaviors that will incentivize that type of, less knowledge or less outcomes or so forth. The other thing is, for me, when I think about guiding principles, I think of, we know what hasn't worked. At-risk funding is an example of that. We can follow the increase in money of at-risk funding, and it did not work. Doesn't mean that we take that funding away. It just means, why are we requiring all of these things that we do for at-risk? It's not working. Let's just give them a poverty weighting and be done. Because at-risk funding, by the time we started really expanding it to current day, adding millions upon millions, what we saw is the gap between those that paid for their lunch and those that were free and reduced, both of them, or you could just choose free. That gap has widened. So the kids that weren't doing well during Gannon are now doing worse. Besides, of course, put aside the test that was changed where it increased 24 points. If we disregard that one, I'm just referring to NAEP, ACT, and our previous state assessment. So those are my concerns, or guiding, make it accountable, don't incentivize the behaviors you don't want, and don't continue doing the same thing if it didn't work.
Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I absolutely also agree with the phase-in piece, and that it would be very detailed out for districts to know. But I think also maybe some checkpoints throughout there to make sure that our investment is, we're receiving investment, we have the evidence and the outcomes that we're looking for throughout that phase-in process. Thank you.
So let me ask you this, when you say checkpoints, because that's a very interesting thought. That's not something that we put in our new formula, we moved forward, and we have certain reports we get on an annual basis, but I don't think we ever looked at those relative to our formula. Can you give me paint a little bit more of a picture for me?
I guess what I'm thinking is if you're phasing in the first year, you have the specific objectives that you're looking for that first year, but also some return on the objectives. Is it producing what you want? Because if we start this process and it's not, then we need to know that at this point it is working, maybe the next step it isn't. So we have those checkpoints just to self-check our committee to make sure we're getting the results that we're looking for.
So setting some specific measurables, okay. Representative Steele, I'm sorry, I had a moment there.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wholeheartedly believe that we have to have measurable outcomes, measurable objectives. That's something that has been lacking in this policy that we've had for years and years. I mean, dating back to 2000 when all of this first started, there's never been accountability measures. Accreditation has changed, and we haven't always had schools be held accountable throughout that process. And so perhaps tying accountability to some funding will be able to reach the overall goals that our legislature has for education in Kansas. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. What would you think are things that are important for us to measure?
Reading and math, civics.
How would you like to measure them?
Well, we can't continue to change cut scores because we're not going to continue. We don't have long-term data to know whether things are working or not. So if we look at our ACT scores, we've dropped again. That's concerning. If we look at our NAEP, year after year, we've continued to drop. So if we use a national test that has national standing and we're continuing to drop in that, that's highly concerning. That tells me our kids aren't reading. So I think we should continue to use a national standard because that's something that isn't changing and that we could tie our funding to.
Okay. Interesting thoughts. I might add some of my thoughts in that realm, that whatever we do for measurements, we tend to not focus in on particular cohorts, and I'd like to see us measure cohorts. I'd like us to be able to take a measure of where a student is and how much do they grow. I've never thought that it's reasonable to expect all kids to become a 3 and 4 overnight, although that's our desire. And obviously, the way the data set ranges, that will never happen. But to me, one of the things that I think is really important is growth, and how do we measure growth in a way that's reasonable and accurate, takes into consideration some of the socioeconomics and things like that. So I just might kind of throw that out on as something to think about as well. Anybody else have any thoughts that they want to share? Okay. Senator Petty?
Well, I think that it's important that we continue to include graduation rate. Graduation rate's very important. It's been a milestone that we've looked at over time. And I know we've had conflicting discussions about the value of it, but it is the measure that does say where you're going to go after you leave K-12. So graduation rate, I think, is a very important and is an important measure, and it backs up for families and for our school districts.
I think as a standalone, I don't have a lot of faith in it, but when I look at it as one of the pieces of the puzzle, it's certainly one of the pieces that matters. But I think if we can broaden what we're looking at and measuring growth, we'll know if we're moving the football. And I think that's something that nobody is in this room because that's anti to what their desire is. I mean, we all picked education to be a part of in one way or another because we really want kids to do well. And I think more measurements help us get there. Graduation is something, just not everything. For me, and others may feel differently, and that's okay. Senator Petty?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You're asking for
Yep.
standards. You're asking for measurements. And so I think it's a very important one. None of these should be standalones. You know, we just heard about having a national norm test. The Kansas moved away from a national norm test, 20 years ago? I mean, for that very reason, because we wanted to see how we were performing in Kansas, and we are doing just that. Personally, I have trouble with NAEP because NAEP only picks out a select number of students in certain grades and does not test all, as our state assessments do. So you're asking for information, you're asking for items, graduation rate has to be there.
And I absolutely agree with you. You said it's part of the puzzle. What I'm hearing us say is we want the measurements to be multifaceted. When you've kind of, everybody has different measurements that they'd like to see. I think that's what we're saying. And that would certainly be one of them. Representative Brantley and then Representative, then Member Porter, and then Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think, too, and I agree with all of your ideas, and if we establish those measurements ahead of time, then we can look for the growth. One other thing I want to throw out there is that pilot assessment piece that is going on in 6th District to look at the data from those districts also with the funding formula. So I just don't want you to forget about that.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Porter?
To go along with graduation rates, I think there's other things that we can look at that may indicate that, for instance, we use the ACT. There's a subset of Kansas students that take the SAT. I think it might be interested to know how Kansas, and by the way, I do not know the answer to that question, but I think that might be something that would be valuable. Also, we have I would like to look at the number of students, whether or not it's increasing or not, that are being successful on advanced placement tests or dual enrollment courses, whether or not that is that shows a positive or a negative response. I think that since there has been some expressed concern with graduation rates, I think we need to look at those other things that also would indicate strength or weakness. I think it'd be valuable information for us to have.
Thank you. And I'm so sorry, I did not hear the test that you mentioned. When you were talking about CTE, before you said dual enrollment, you said another test, or did you say the SAT again?
Advanced placement.
Advanced placement. Okay, thank you. All right, Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciated the approach we took when it came to special ed discussions. Dr. Harwood asked people in the field to come and get together and give us their input. So I think teacher input and stakeholder input is very, very important. One thing that I think we've missed, and I've brought this up before, gotten a little bit of resistance, but I think the public has a right to come and testify to us, and I don't think we've afforded them that. And before, when I brought it up, my recollection is that I don't remember which chair it was that had the discussion, but that we are all here on this panel representative of those people. But in my experience, people are much happier with an end product if they feel like they've been able to contribute ideas towards it. And I might have all the best ideas in the world, but it's been quite a while since I was in a K-12 classroom. So I think stakeholder input is very, very important. And I think as a body, we could have done a better job. Maybe we still have time to do a better job in gathering that and providing that opportunity.
And next I have Dr. Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's a few things I think about as we're talking about this, and the first of which is the word accountability itself. Because yes, it's accountability to serve the students the best way possible, but it's also accountability in the formula to use the funds as they're prescribed, right? So I do think there's two parts of it as determined in the original bill. The second part is, and this is the perplexing challenge we have as practitioners, is that on one hand, we hear a particular narrow assessment is what we should be held accountable to. And then we also talk about the ROSE capacities, and I read those, they're so broad. And it's that wavering back and forth. And then on top of that, the accountability that's on us as practitioners is to, of course, our local communities, our board, state board of education, legislative body, and federal government as a whole. And there's not always 100% alignment between all those entities. And that's where it becomes a little bit of a challenge when you talk about the application of, hey, we want to look at this measure or this is the priority, as well as the paradox between ROSE capacities and a singular assessment. So something to think about, just the broad side of those. Thank you.
So ROSE is too broad and you'd like more factors? Help me, I want to make sure I summarize what you're thinking.
Yeah, so when I think about the ROSE capacities, there are a lot of those things that with enough work, we could show like, yeah, we have a lot of students performing in this area. Some of them become more difficult. For example, the self-evaluation of the student themselves as a person became more difficult when it became legislatively impossible to assess students through a survey when they're sharing their perspective, and then parents opt out, the kids opt out. So there's some things in here that are very difficult to actually maybe quantify, but I believe if you put educators in a room and said, hey, tell me how your student's doing in these areas, most have a good pulse on their individual classes and those students. But once again, that may not be as defined as the NAEP or the state assessment.
Okay, thank you. Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I get a little nervous when we toss around things like ROSE capacities are just too broad. I mean, those are there because of court decisions. So I don't want us going down a path where we just toss out the ROSE capacities because they don't fit in a chart. I'm not saying that's what anyone said, but I want to be cautious as we move forward talking about those.
Thank you, Madam
Director
Chair.
Rooker.
Thank you. I would say the ROSE capacities are there because that's really what's healthiest for kids, to be well-rounded and have that full range of information, like of skills to deal with life after high school. And I think we do have some metrics in place. I think Board Member Porter raised several of them that you know, in terms of their life skills that are embedded in ROSE, I think there are ways that our schools are preparing students and exposing them to opportunities. Individual plans of study are a thing that helps students assess where they want to go. So I do think if we're thinking more broadly than the black and white results of an actual test, I think there are metrics that can be reviewed to see how our students are progressing as they matriculate through K-12 or pre-K through 12 and off to their lives beyond.
Can you help me understand some quantifiable ones for some of the broader ROSE capacities?
I don't have them in front of me at the moment, but when you think about preparing them to be, do you have them? Okay. Sufficient oral, written communication skills to enable students to function in a complex and rapidly changing civilization, sufficient knowledge of economic, social, and political systems to enable the student to make informed choices, sufficient understanding of governmental processes to enable the student to understand the issues that affect his or her community, state, and nation, sufficient self-knowledge and knowledge of his or her mental and physical wellness, sufficient grounding in the arts to enable each student to appreciate his or her cultural and historical heritage, sufficient training or preparation for advanced training in either academic or vocational fields so as to enable a child to choose and pursue life's work intelligently, and sufficient levels of academic and vocational skills to enable public school students to compete favorably with their counterparts in surrounding states in academics or in the job market. So I think when you think about a lot of the work that the board and the agency have done around post-secondary success metrics, I think we have quantifiable data that speaks to improvement among our students on a number of metrics that the Rose capacities speak to. And I would love to see some of that brought into our discussions. And I know some of you are on, or maybe all of you are on the education committees that receive that annual report, but the board gets it in the fall, and there are quantifiable data points that show how we're doing when we think about the real world learning and the kinds of CTE exposure that our students have. The individual plans of study are designed to help guide students through that self-exploration that's necessary to know, do I want to go to college? Do I want to get that welding certificate when I graduate high school? I think that we have graduation requirements that speak to some of the others. If you have taken your physical and health classes, if you've taken, now I think there's a financial literacy requirement. I maybe have lost the thread of some of the enactments over the last few years. I think we have adopted things that are in alignment with the Rose capacities that we could be looking at.
Okay, thank you very much. Senator Hill, I'm sorry, I've got the old habit.
Well, sometimes we like old habits, Madam Chair. Thank you. You know, and I apologize, I missed some of the preface to this, so I'm just kind of going off of the idea of discussion, and I'm hearing quite a lot about state role in education governance, and it seems to be kind of the topic of discussion here. And I guess I would probably take just a little bit different tack. It seems like sometimes that we want to try to assess every possible aspect of a student, and if we really want to do that, maybe we should just set up kind of like an inquisition hearing where we bring all college seniors in or high school seniors in and quiz them about how they feel about themselves and what they want to do in the future, and come up with some rubrics for how education is working based upon that. I think if, you know, and I don't mean to indicate that education has anything to do with manufacturing, but I think if we look at the manufacturing model where the quality control of a manufacturing plant does not rest on taking every widget off the line and examining it. And I think a term used around here a lot is getting lost in the weeds. I think it's a lot more like getting lost in the hedges. If you've ever been in a European maze, we can't see the direction we're going because we have so many turns and twists. And you know, God bless the Rose standards. I mean, we've talked about them a lot. They're very vague. We can read about anything we want to into them. I kind of go back a little bit before the Rose Standards and before the court system determined that that was the ideal. I look at what does our Constitution say we should do. And if we focus on the things that the Constitution says that the legislature should do, I think we'd have a lot more clarity. I don't think it's our role to determine what every child is doing. I think that's the role of the local schools. I think we need to have a statistically significant understanding of how we are doing an academic job of education, a vocational job of education, a scientific job of education. And that doesn't involve doing 100 different tests. I'm not sure NAEP's the right answer either, but NAEP is a statistically significant test. And I don't want to know. I really, from the state level, I really don't want to know how student 123 at district number 305 is doing. That is the parent's responsibility. That is the local board of education's responsibility. That's the local administration's responsibility. I want to know how education as a whole is doing in the state. And I think we have gone through those hedges so long and so far that we have burdened local school districts to the point they are drowning under the weight of assessment and requirement. I would like to see us really focus on simplification, verification, and accuracy. Thank you, Madam Chair.
How would you simplify?
Well, first of all, thank you for the question. I would simplify by saying, establish correlations. You know, one of the challenges I've had since I've been in this body is that we don't look at the significance of things. We throw numbers out all the time and we don't look at the significance of it. Is NAEP correlated with our state assessments, for instance? Or is some other simplified assessment correlated with what we want to know? And instead of saying, you know, I guess the layman approach is to assess as many things as possible. I think the analytical approach is assess as few things as possible and have accuracy. And so if you have a high correlation between state assessments and NAEP, for instance, or somebody mentioned a nationally normed test that gives us information of how we compare to other states. That's good too. I mean, I think it is good for us to know how we compare with other states. I think it's good to know how school districts compare with each other, but I think the use of that is probably not very accurate because they don't all have the same students. And I mean, there's a lot of difference between being an inner city Kansas City school and a tiny district in western Kansas, very, very different. So I think using a comparison between those two districts is really inaccurate. I think we need to look at it from a state level. Is there statistical significance? I mean, for instance, if we look at reading scores, I mean, do we have an accurate test that can say whether children are proficient at reading? Okay, if we have that, you know, if it's accurate, then can we be statistically significant by looking at a sampling of 10% of the students throughout the state? And instead of requiring all this information, let's try to require less information and have statistically significant and accurate information.
Thank you very much. I asked a complicated question and got a complicated answer. Representative Steele.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To kind of go off of what Senator Hill was potentially talking about of rural and urban being vastly different and still holding accountable and having something outcome measurable, all local boards are required to do a needs assessment. And that includes where are they doing well, where are they not doing well, and how are they reallocating their resources to do better. This year in our budget bill, we passed where agencies are now required to come up with their own measurable outcome metrics and that they would get their funding based on whether they were doing those things or not. And we also have schools that are needing to do KESA 2.0, and they're supposed to focus on structured literacy, standards alignment, balanced assessment, quality instruction, and they themselves get to determine what that means for them. So again, what might work out in Scott City, Kansas is not going to work out in Olathe. So maybe potentially having simplifying, correlating, but utilizing the tools that our districts are already required to do and allowing them to do what's best for their area would potentially help still have high outcomes that it kind of sounds like we should be going towards, but it allows them to still maintain what is important to their school, their community, and how they're helping their students.
Thank you. I'm processing what you said and how do we, because it creates a challenge that we want a set of metrics that can be applied evenly or universally and fairly in my mind, but then allowing for the uniqueness of our varying districts is an interesting challenge to weave into that. I have Senator Erickson and then Representative McDonald, and then I might call on Dr. Gibson or Dr. Nineswander to maybe share a little feedback on how do you feel the needs assessment helps you and how is KESA 2.0 informed what you guys do. Since I'm going to put you on the spot, I'm going to give you a little warning. Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I've been listening to the discussion. I think it's a very valuable discussion, and a couple of themes I hear that I think our most important guiding principle has to be student outcomes, and specifically prioritizing academic student outcomes. And we think of all these different ways we can do it. When I look at the Rose capacities, I don't see a single one that isn't dependent upon literacy. And if we wanted to have a specific focus, it ought to be every Kansas student is reading on grade level and is proficient at grade 3, period, end of story. That cuts across rural, urban, suburban, period. And our resources ought to reflect that goal. And that will take care of a lot of the other issues that we see. Now, we can't forget the kids who are already in the system, but if we stop passing students on who are basically illiterate, we're going to see an increase in a lot of the areas we're concerned about. So there's a very specific area that we should focus on, and our guiding principle has to be student outcomes. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate what you said, and it kind of brought something to my mind in my own family. You mentioned that we should prioritize academic student outcomes, and I myself have a son who's 19 who had really, really good grades, a special needs student, college credit, but we have missed the mark to a degree when it comes to some of those softer skills with Rose capacities, and so he is not currently working or in school, and I think he probably needs more time to mature. But our public schools meet kids where they are, and I just think we need to keep that in mind. That's not actually why I raised my hand to talk. I would have a request of staff. If we could maybe be given the Lori Taylor study. I think a lot of the answers to some of our questions are found in that study. So I think it would help with this conversation for us to revisit the Lori Taylor study. Thank you.
Dr. Gibson or Nineswander, did one of you want to contribute?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's a couple questions, as I recall. The one was about needs assessment, and the second one, KESA 2.0. So needs assessment, if you're a system that has really looked at grounding in identifying data to help inform decisions, you've been doing needs assessments forever, right? Maybe not in the format of which the legislative body has set, but that's just the system of how to improve things. The challenge we see, or at least I can say I see, is that the needs assessment typically comes right before the fiscal year, right? Ends and gets ready to go to the next. However, some of the decisions we're making are several months before. So for example, the staffing requests that come out in our district because of size about November. We make decisions in January and then filters into the needs assessment, but we couldn't wait because we're already into the process of budgeting before the budget begins. if that makes sense. So the sequence doesn't always work. Does it inform? Yes. Is it a good practice? Absolutely. I think the fact that we have some flexibility locally to add additional items to look at, for example, student growth, which you would not measure on a state assessment, but you would maybe on something like FastBridge, is something that helps us. The second part of that is the KISA 2.0, or the accreditation model currently in place, is, in my opinion, the best model that's been in place in my time. And it's been quite some time. So I would say that we've built upon what we've learned. And the fact that we can use our data to inform what is it we need to work on as a district, here's how we get there, and here's the assessment data to prove that we're working towards it is making a difference. And that's, once again, just a good cycle of inquiry and making decisions. So in my opinion, I think we're on the right track, but that's just my personal opinion, and maybe it's different in other districts.
That's helpful, because I do see a lot of helpful things in KISA 2.0, but I also sometimes feel like when we're not seeing the growth that we want to see, we don't really have an end resolution. There are some districts that have been at a pretty low spot for a long time, so it calls into question some of our processes and how do we resolve them. It's a key question in mind. And before I go to Senator Erickson, I'll see if Dr. Neinswander wanted to add anything to that.
Thank you. So for needs assessment, that is in our district and similar, so I'll just speak to ours, is a 12-month continuing process. We just continue to evaluate every month at our board meetings. One thing that has been while standards alignment is our main KISA goal that we're working on right now. We are 4 years into the process. We now have all K-8 trained in structured literacy. We have a balanced assessment program outside of just the state assessment. But to get quality core instruction, we had to make sure that our standards were first aligned, so we knew not only horizontally across grades, but vertically as especially they transition into different buildings, that our standards were aligned. But for the needs assessment, just as an example, I have 3 board members that meet monthly with our school mental health team. Just because we know, especially in our general ed population, we have a lot of mental health needs that are not being addressed either through an IEP. So it's just, but that needs assessment then, as we're going into next year, this May board meeting, we'll be reallocating. We have great people on the bus, but there will be people in different seats next year based off of just every year really analyzing where our students are and where the gaps are. But I agree with Corey, the KISA 2.0 aligns more with what we should be doing, and it shouldn't be something different. It should align with what every school district, it looks different in every school district, but it gives us the flexibility to be able to monitor what the needs are in ours. We have a lot of transition. 30% of our kids will be different next year. But we're so close to Topeka, there's just that mobility, which has a different set of challenges.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think that Dr. Neinswander touched on what I was going to ask, but I want to make sure legislatively, there's nothing in the building needs assessment statute that says they can't have the flexibility to be working on it all year or whatever meets their timeline, correct? They just have to have it reported out by a specific time, but I want to make sure they have that flexibility in statute so that it meets the needs of our districts to be able to be flexible enough, but that report out's the only specific, if I recall.
I see our revisers huddling. We'll let them huddle unless our phone a friend, Dr. Harwood, calls off the top of his head or somebody else does. Please do.
So, I mean, the legislatively required needs assessment is 3 questions, and they have to be referred to when the board approves the budget. There's nothing that says you can't be working on them year-round. It's just that I would say it's kind of an artificial time when you actually have to say, yes, we were working on this, and this is what we came up with. And the reason I say artificial is that September might not be the time that you do that, but that's when the budget is there, but there's nothing, it's just the cycle and said, yes, we did this. One of the things that Dr. Nuenswander just said is that they're reallocating things now. Well, in September, they're just going to have to say, we did these things to reallocate budget based on the things we were doing. Doesn't matter that they did it in May instead.
If I may, Madam Chair, I think sometimes there's an attitude of following the letter of the statute, which I want to make sure is clear and helpful to districts versus the intent. Of course, what is the intent of the building needs assessment? Is that you're looking at data to improve outcomes for kids. So the bigger picture, I believe, at least for me, I'll speak for me as a legislator, is that you're being intentional in looking at those items to make sure you're focused on what's going to help move the needle for helping student outcomes. So, you know, if there are obstacles legislatively or in statute that districts feel is not accomplishing the intent, then we can go back and fix that. So we just need to know. My other question, Madam Chair, is on KESA 2.0. I believe that was implemented in 24, so we're, what, 2 years in? And are we seeing anything? I know 2 years is still fairly early, but I would hope that 2 years into the process now, if it's a much improved process, that we would start to see the impact of the new model. Have we seen any evidence of that?
I don't know if anybody would like to respond to that. Dr. Harwood?
So I can say that the phase in of that was the first year was coming up with plans. This year is implementing plans. The next year is when we actually start putting the data to the plan. So it is a process going forward. It would be difficult to say that the plan you started implementing this year actually is what made the difference in things. But what KSD will be doing is using that data to determine what districts need additional support based on their performance, I mean, relative to everybody else and and what we have the capacity to support. So based on the way it's phased in, to be able to say, this is the improvement based on this, that would be very difficult, if impossible to say. But that is the plan going forward, is that each district will be able to point to their data and their improvement, hopefully there, and their plan, or be looking at their data if there's not improvement and saying, what's going on with our plan? Are we not doing the right things? Are we not doing the right things in the right way? And how do we move forward from there? So it's more global than that, but I think it's the right process.
Dr. Nuenswander?
I will say locally what we've found in the last 2 years is while instruction might have been good, it wasn't aligned. And we found a lot of gaps in our standards as kids transition to different grade levels, that we found there were a lot of gaps where while we may have been assessing a set of content, it was not being taught at that point in time because there was an assumption that the grade before, so in just the 2 years of our standards of alignment, we have found that there's been a lot of gaps. Just that vertical alignment where there wasn't the communication. There was horizontal across 4th grade, but there was not a lot from 3rd, 4th, 5th, So those are things locally that that's been our one area of main focus because it's what we needed. That's why I think this KISA model has been better than in the past because it gave us very specific things to address.
Senator Erickson has a follow-up, and then I have a follow-up.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I kind of find that shocking that there wasn't vertical alignment. So how widespread do you think that problem has been, that there hasn't been vertical alignment, and for how long hasn't there been? I know that was a topic of discussion 20 years ago when I was in the system, is making sure that we had horizontal and vertical alignment. So I'm surprised to hear that that's happening as recent as it is, but how widespread do we think that's been a problem for local districts?
Dr. Nineswander.
When I say gaps in vertical alignment, I'll say we were 85% aligned, but we did find some key areas. When you have new staff, you have, over a 5-year period, a lot of change in staff, getting them to truly focus back on it and communicate, we started finding gaps that I would say we were 85% vertically aligned, but there's still key gaps where, I thought that was addressed, and we haven't had that communication in the last 4 or 5 years with transition. So it was extremely good practice for us.
Okay, and what you said leads into my follow-up is, I think that is the value of KISA 2.0 and the needs assessment is you find your deficiencies, you're addressing them. Have you addressed all of those gaps 100% at this point?
We're in the process of that. So we've recognized where our gaps are. So we've got to make sure that they've got the instructional materials, all that. But yeah, I mean, that's what we're into right now and we're implementing. That's what we spend most of our PD days on during the school year is that standards alignment goal. So while we're still doing balanced assessments, structured literacy, we're making sure that any new staff coming in start getting the letters training. So we're still doing all the other ones, but we're going into next year, we will be fully aligned with our standards.
Based on what you've done so far, have you kind of set here's what I expect to see now that we've made this change in terms of what you'll see in your data? Have you said, I think we'll see a 2% increase or?
I can't predict what the state assessment is very much a lag measure. We would hope to start seeing, it's more of our local assessments, the fast bridge, that we can monitor a lot more quicker.
So
yeah.
Have you set kind of what you expect to see? I mean, because it seems to me like you identified a problem, and if you're like a medical doctor and you've identified a problem and it's somebody has a high fever and you give them aspirin, you expect the temperature to come down a couple of points. So if you reverse engineer that, you found your problem, because our goal is to increase the thermometer, not bring it down. I just wondered, in any of those measurements in KISA 2.0, have you set a kind of a goal for what you think your district can move the needle on some of these?
Well, we hope to see growth in both math and English language arts. Those are our two main areas. That with the combination of we hired a literacy facilitator to get into the classrooms, to help monitor, to help check. So we haven't set like, okay, we want to see this percent. We just believe it's going to have a definite impact on it.
Okay.
But we had to get aligned first and find out where our gaps were.
Okay. Thank you. And will you be internally figuring out how you can measure growth? I'm just trying to think of that growth measurement. I think is important to all of us. It's not a magic number, but did we help that student move forward? And when you look at your data, that your data was able to show you a problem, and I'm just trying to understand how we're using the processes that we're using, and I appreciate you helping me understand it. When you give your monitoring, you are looking at individuals' growth. Have you figured out a way statistically or quantifiably that you're making sure a certain percentage of students grow, or you have an idea of what percentage of students are growing, or how's it working for you, I guess?
Right now, so to answer your question, we haven't said anything like an aggregate grade level. Now, we can pull that. What we're focused on is at an individual student level. Why is this student? Where is that? And we use a lot of tier 2, sometimes we need to get into tier 3 interventions, but it's more at an individual student. And before we can address the individual student, we got to make sure that they're being assessed on the accurate content, because it might not be necessarily the student had a deficiency. It might not have been that the assessment was not aligned in a timely manner to the instruction. So we've been monitoring each individual student, but in aggregate, we hope that raises everything.
And thank you so much for this conversation, because the aggregate, I think, is part of the end goal for all of us, and the time that and resources that our state's investing in. And in my mind, it's always been complex on how we get to the aggregate there. I have a few things that I like, but it's helpful to hear your point of view. Representative Brantley.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to address the line on looking at the growth on those students, and you're using the FAST bridge. And when they use that FAST bridge with literacy, it has those subsets, and you can use the group growth report to see the minute growth, and you can track that through that group growth report, but you have to have the 2 benchmarkings completed to get that, but you can use that in your FAST bridge. On another piece, when I did math standards alignments with districts, it is a never-ending process. Once you pull out your group in and you maybe put your standards by grade level up on the wall and you sit back and look at that 30,000-foot view, where are the gaps? You look at your curriculum, you identify where those gaps are in the curriculum, but let's say half your staff change, well, then you got to go back and redo that again with all of the staff, and then maybe you have a curriculum change, and you start all over again. So it is a never-ending process to look at that standards alignment, and I would encourage districts to it's never complete, keep it going, and keep those discussions going, because then you can see where those gaps are, and even in that alignment with FastBridge on where those sub-skills are missing, so that you can make those changes on tier 2 and 3.
Thank you, and I think I allowed myself to wander a little bit far from the original discussion item of founding principles. Director Rooker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate you saying that, because it's what I understand of the accreditation model, Article 6, regardless of which you're looking at, the idea is it is a continuous cycle of improvement, and that we're always striving to improve quality. That is the first sentence of Article 6, that we, the legislature shall provide for intellectual, educational, vocational, and scientific improvement by establishing and maintaining public schools, educational institutions, and related activities. Like, I think that idea that we're never, and Madam Chair, you started the meeting by expressing the idea that we know 100% is never going to be, like, we strive for that. We want all students. The human condition is such that whether you're talking about the teachers involved, the students involved, the administrators involved, there's always going to be ways to improve. And as long as we are working in good faith to achieve that improvement, I think the tension between wanting that number that tells us, did we get there or not? And some things are not quantifiable in that manner. I think we've got to figure out what represents the effort involved.
And just to be clear, my comment about not all there was a reference to the mathematical principles of percentiles. I have great faith in our students. I think our students can do wonderful and great things. So to get back to the principles, I think we all have an importance for measurements, but I don't think that we have a unified vision of whether it's one metric or multiple. But I think we've had very helpful discussion on that. I think I heard consensus on phasing in. And so we asked that question, do we have consensus on phasing in from the voting members? And Representative Steele.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think without having further information on what's specifically included in the formula, the phase-in is a little for me. If we're looking at saying, hey, you know, we're voting on this next legislative session, and to say that it should be implemented for the 27-28 school year, that to me is truly an unrealistic for schools to be able to adapt right away for a July 1 fiscal year start date. But if we were saying we're going to do this, we're going to look at it, we're going to outline it, and then it's going to start your 28-29 school year, I think that's very reasonable. That gives school districts a year to plan, a year to look out and see where things are and what they need to do. So if that's kind of the way the phase-in is being looked at, that's good with me. I think it would be very difficult to say, okay, 27-28 school year, we're going to do this part of the formula, this all stays the same. Next school year, we're adding this, and then this all stays the same. Like, I think that might really get touchy.
So we can make a limited consensus if the group is agreeable that we won't implement the next year. We won't say what the phase-in looks like, but we just want to give the districts a peace of mind that we're not expecting them to make an adjustment in 1 year, because it's something we haven't talked about as a group. So I don't know what we'll come up with. So Senator Petty and then Senator Erickson.
Well, I know as we've looked at other states, and Colorado being an example, their phase-in was a 5-year phase-in. So it's not, and I think we have to take into consideration all the different, well, we don't even know at this point what we're talking about specifically, but what kinds of changes are in place. So it's not out of the realm of what other states have done to have a multi-year phase-in.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, going back to the original discussion on this item, we don't know. It's going to depend on the complexity of, or are there going to be any changes? I've heard conversation of people wanting just keep the formula the same. In that case, we wouldn't need a phase-in. If we change one little part, do away with high enrollment, just for example, does that necessitate a 5-year phase-in? I think until we know exactly the changes that we are or are not making, it's really difficult to say, one, if we need a phase-in at all, and two, how long that will be. I think we have to know the specifics before we can really determine that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Dr. Harwood.
And actually, to follow up on that, that's a really good example of what could be quick and what could be high enrollment. There is a way to get rid of high enrollment, put the money back into the base, and there's less than a 1% change in anybody's budget. Low enrollment, on the other hand, if you're going to do something significant with low enrollment, may take multiple years, because if you're moving from something like just enrollment to sparsity, your districts may need several years to think about ideas of how we adapt to that change. So I think what Senator Erickson is exactly correct, is that high enrollment is easy, low enrollment is hard. And so, and how that works for districts will be different.
Okay, so I don't think we're at consensus yet, and that's okay, but we've had good discussion. We know the things that we're looking about. So I'm going to go ahead and move us down to the next part of the agenda, and we are going to begin with Jennifer with a review of the high-density at-risk weighting models. But before she begins, there is a chart in your packet that's also your homework that I'd like to call your attention to, because you might want to take notes on this as you go. And what I thought would be helpful is reviewing the things that we looked at, because we looked at a lot of different runs, and just getting the highlights of those to get them fresh in our memory. And then we can have further discussion. So you may want to pull out this piece of paper that is titled Education Funding Task Force School Finance Formula Considerations Worksheet. That should be in all of your packets. And the packets were in the under.
Madam Chair, they were actually on top of the packets. Was the last
okay.
thing I handed out this morning. So it should be a white paper that was 10 pages. But it was on top of everybody's yellow folders this morning.
Is there anybody who doesn't see theirs?
We do have a couple of extra copies we have. So if you don't have one, please let us know. We'd happy to make sure you've got them.
Okay, I'm going to interpret the silence as yes, everyone has one. Jenny, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jennifer Light, KLRD. Lovely to see you all again this interim as we get started here. As the chair said, there is the worksheet that has been provided for you. This is, just to be clear, this is your own personal worksheet and will not be collected back up. So it is just for you to be able to reference, take notes, and be able to have discussions tomorrow afternoon. So that's really the intent of that worksheet, is more something to help you be able to have the dialogue, same as this morning, with the agreements. So if you want to make notes along with what's going on, the weightings section does start on page 4. I'm going to start with at-risk weightings, not high-density at-risk weightings. In the packets in front of you, we have 2 documents for every single one of the weighting sections that we have. So the first one is the overview of the models, which has a rainbow next to it, and then multiple graphs, and then a blue paper that would say, for this one it says at-risk weightings assumptions. And so what this is hoping to do for you is it's hoping that between the 2 of these documents, you can look at overall numbers from each of the models side by side. And if you're like, I don't remember what assumptions we put with each of those, the at-risk weightings assumptions is supposed to help you understand what was changed in the models. We did not print off all of the models again for everybody, as you did receive them from us last year, and we did send out PDF copies of all the models to you by email. So we were hoping to save a few trees this year with the models from last year. Of course, once you get into the models that are multi-components put together, we will start printing them again. We're just not reprinting the ones that we had done last year for you. So starting with at-risk weightings. The current version for at-risk weighting uses free lunch as students as the calculation purposes for at risk, and that is used with a weighting of 0.484. I would remind you that in the current model, as you all know, because we've discussed it multiple times, the free student or the free lunch students are not the students who are receiving the money. Students who are at risk receive the money. That's just the way that the calculation for the funding comes in, is by using free lunch students. So for all of the models, as a general overview reminder, model 1.0 and 1.01 should be within each of the different weightings. The 1.0 is having, if we removed that weighting entirely. So for at-risk models, that would be if there was no at-risk weighting whatsoever. It does include that high-density at-risk would still be included in this version of the models. But for something like bilingual, when they say there is no bilingual weighting, it is just the removal of the bilingual weighting. All other weightings would remain in as they are currently. It just changes the amount of money that would be done if we just deleted that weighting entirely. 1.01 is if the decision was made to take out the weighting and then take the equivalency of that funding and put it into base. And so base always increases when you're looking at the 1.01, no matter which one we're talking about, because we are rolling whatever the weighting is into the base. So for at-risk weightings, model 1.01, the base increases from 5,378 to 6,275. I also want to take a moment to say that, yes, all of these are using the calculations for fiscal year 2025. So that would be why it's at 5,378 for base, because the models were done last summer and we wanted to use the same numbers across the board when we were looking at each of these individual weightings so that you'd be able to compare in a slightly closer way to see how each of the weightings would be affected by the changes being done. So all of these weightings and all of the models are using the 25 numbers, using legal max numbers from the SPED update, which is 5/30/25. So when we get started with this year's models, that we may change that. We'll have a discussion with the chairs as to how they want to go. But for purposes of the models we're reviewing, this is still using the 2025 numbers. So, model 1.0 and 1.01, basically across in all of the weightings. Does anybody have any questions on either of those two before we actually get into the weightings that deal with at-risk weighting specifically?
Questions for Jenny? Jenny, you've been real clear, so they have no questions. Good job. Board Member Porter, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand.
I want to make sure I understand. I'm talking about 01. The at-risk rating currently given would be distributed across the state. So tell me if I'm right or wrong. Those districts that have fewer at-risk students would not benefit from this, and those that have less at-risk students would actually benefit.
So I believe the question is, just so I can restate it to make sure I'm understanding this correctly.
I'm not sure I said it right. But
well, let's see if I understood what you were trying to say. So the question, I believe, is whether or not the amount of at-risk students you have would affect how much funding you are getting. So you were saying, so the question is, if you have more at-risk students, you would actually be receiving less funding if in model 1.01, where it's rolled into base. And if you had fewer students, you'd be getting more money because you wouldn't be dealing with the students. So I think overall, that is a fair statement to say. I know that we ran models with the district by district examples, and so it's been a while since I looked specifically at that to see if there were any examples of a school district that actually has more students who'd be getting more from base in general, but because the total amount of money is being added to the total amount of base, it's based on your overall FTE, which would go down for everybody since there is no at-risk weighting.
Thank you. I just wanted that.
Dr. Harwood.
Again, we've talked about this, and just for anybody that's watching, is that this is the number of free lunch students that's determining the at-risk weighting, not the number of at-risk students. So a district with fewer free lunch students would see a net increase, and a district with a lot of free lunch students would see a net decrease. The at-risk, the at-risk is not necessarily tied one for one for that. I just want to make sure that when we're talking about at-risk funding, the funding mechanism is free lunch students, even though you spend the money on at-risk folks. So, because even districts with low relative poverty still have at-risk students.
Thank you. That's been a problematic disconnect between our, our, the way that we distribute and the way that we implement that causes angst sometimes. Any other questions on those first two models for Jenny? All right, Jenny, go ahead.
Okay, well, good news. We're moving away from free lunch as the reason for how you're coming to the at-risk weighting for the next couple models. So model 1.02 says that instead of using the free lunch, they would use Title I percentages from the federal government. And the important thing to note here is that it would be replaced with the Title I percentages that they received in the previous school year. So currently, we're in school year 25-26, and if the Title I percentage model that was run was used, they'd be using the Title I percentages from school year 24-25 to figure out how much special education weighting there would be. So that is one option, is using Title I percentages from the previous year. It would have to be the previous year because the Title I percentages come out late enough that we wouldn't be able to calculate those and start rolling the money out in a timely manner. And so using the prior year just ensures that everybody, again, has that consistency and understanding of what money is coming to them. Is the reasoning that was used for this. That does not mean you cannot choose to change your mind on what year you'd want to use.
Jenny, can you help me remember how Title I is defined?
Ooh, I should have known you were going to ask that.
I'm like the pop quiz lady, and you can feel free to get back with me later on that one.
I am happy to phone a friend if somebody else would like to speak up about that, or I'd be happy to get that information for you here shortly after I sit down.
Dr. Hart, would you like to help me out, please?
So I don't remember the the total calculation, but it's actually based on students living in poverty, which uses the free and reduced lunch numbers for the district to calculate it.
Thank you. Any other questions on this one for Jenny? Representative McDonald's.
I guess I would just point out that poverty is not the only reason kids are at risk. And so when we overgeneralize like this, we're kind of potentially not accounting for like foster students or foster care children or any number of things. So this makes me very nervous.
Okay, you might want to note that on your chart. Any other questions on this one? Then, Jenny, let's move on to 1.03, please.
Sure. 1.03 through 1.06 all use state assessments as the basis instead of free lunch. So 1.03 uses just level 1. So the number of students you have in level 1 would be used to calculate the percentage of at-risk funding. I would like to note that this would be the higher percentage of students in level 1. I just had to finish reading to make sure I remembered that correctly. The higher percentage of students who are in level 1 of either the ELA or the math. So if your math percentage of level 1 is higher, the math percentage would be used. If the ELA is higher, the ELA percentage would be used instead of, so it'd be one or the other, it wouldn't be combined. Okay. And this model retains the current at-risk weighting of 0.484. So it maintains the same weighting factors, just changing the student numbers. The same is true with model 1.04. The difference there is that it does level 1 and level 2. So it takes both levels 1 and levels 2. Same thing still, that it'd be either ELA or math, whichever percentage is higher would be the amount being used. Then for 1.05, that is using level 1, and then 1.05 is using level 1. It does change the multiplier to 0.597. So that is changed to adjust the at-risk factor to maintain the overall state funding. So in Model 5 and 6, the overall state funding would remain the same. It just would be distributed slightly different, dependent on the state assessment scores. But due to that, the weighting factor had to change. So for level, or for 1.05, that moves it to and for level 1 would move it to a factor of 0.597. And then for levels 1 and 2, which is 1.06, that would change it to a multiplier of 0.299 instead of 0.484. So it's changing the multiplier, but the overall dollar amount of at-risk funding would remain the same.
Jenny, thank you. Before you move on, I think, because the next one is different, I think Senator Erickson had a comment or a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I've asked this question before, but just want to refresh everyone's memory. Jennifer, where did the 0.484 multiplier come from? What was that based on?
So
I think Director Rooker wants to be your phone a friend on that one. Director Rooker?
It's based on audit, and was it the big 2005 study, or was it a specific LPA audit on that risk?
Revisor Long?
Madam Chair, it was a subsequent LPA study on that risk that came after the Montoy case. I can't remember the precise year, but there was a study in the teens, I believe, on at-risk, and LPA concluded 484 number. We can definitely go back and find the audit if the task force is interested in reviewing that.
Vice Chair Erickson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Here's my question. Was that based upon an amount that was determined to be the additional funds necessary to help improve student outcomes for at-risk students, or was it to satisfy a dollar number arbitrarily? That's what I would like to know.
Revisor Long and then Director Rooker, or you're going to defer? Okay, Director Rooker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It was determined that I mean, it's not quite a half FTE, that when you have a student with the risk factors, that there was a connection made in the audit. I don't remember the language, but there was extensive dialogue in the audit about the way that number was determined, that if memory serves.
Revisor Long.
Just point of clarification, it was not arrived at by backing into an appropriated dollar amount. It was a number that was specified in the LPA audit based on findings that the audit had made, if that clarifies things.
Vice Chair Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And two quick questions. How long ago was that, approximately? Okay. It's been a while. The 0.484 has been in place for a while. Is that fair to say? So my question is, have we seen that? Have we seen the improvement that the LPA correlated to the amount of funding? Have we seen that bear out in our student outcomes for our at-risk students?
Director Rooker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would say we reinstated that in either the 17 or 18 legislative action to put the formula in place. And I think if we look at some of the reporting coming out of the State Department, when you look at subsections of students, we do see growth in the groupings. The word is escaping me, but when we think about the different categories of students, when you start slicing the data, we enacted it in 17 or 18 along with a 6-year plan to phase in funding. That goal was reached. We were playing catch up with the funding. We've increased funding it took 6 years to get to the determined amount of funding. I think the Lori Taylor study that Representative McDonald mentioned also speaks to the connection between the cost of the kinds of activities that have to happen to help an at-risk student to close the gap.
So I think the word that you were looking for is subgroups. And I think it would be very interesting, and I think it would help to answer the vice chair's question, is a look back on the state assessment performances of the subgroups. I think that might be where you're trying to go, but feel free to correct me if you're wrong. If I'm wrong.
No, but I would be interested in learning which subgroups have improved. I mean, all I've seen is a decrease in assessment scores, but nevertheless, we also have LPA audits that show at-risk funding isn't being used as appropriated. And just doing quick math, if we implemented that in 17-18, last year it was what, over 500 million, 530 some odd million for at-risk? Let's just say roughly over $4 billion. My question is, are those funds achieving the intended purpose and student outcomes? I would propose no, and that's an area that we need to look at how we can repurpose those to actually help those kids who are struggling. And my first preference, again, no surprise, would be making sure we put that into early literacy, make sure those kids are reading by 3rd grade. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Good line of discussion, and I know that research is printing out the Rose standards and the Taylor West Ed study. I think it would be helpful to have the audit that was referred to and a look back on the subgroups. And I don't expect this overnight because it's a lot of work. To look at trends and have we moved the needle? So Jenny, thank you. Anytime that we stop and get into a discussion, you're welcome to sit down while we wait. I feel bad making you stand that long. I'm sorry. If you want to go ahead and pick up where you left off.
Sure thing. I would also mention we are printing we are looking for, and then we will print the audits that we were discussing here so that you will have copies of that. And we'll send out a PDF copy as well of that once we have it. So also along the lines that Senator Erickson was talking about, I would remind everybody, since this seems like a good place to do that reminding, that at-risk is one of the 3 sections that needs the funding that is provided for at-risk, does go into the at-risk fund and has to be spent on at-risk students. And so that's at-risk, bilingual, and special education are the 3 sections that are required to move that funding. So just as a reminder that when we're discussing those 3, the money that comes to the schools for them are required to be used for those specific items. So appreciate that reminder to flag for everybody else to be thinking about as well. So those are the state assessment models that we discussed last interim. Model 1.07 is where we are at now. If you're looking at the colorful page, that's the yellow line. We tried to also give you a little bit of color coding to help you with that. 1.07 and 1.08 talk about USD poverty. And so we are using, for those models, it uses the poverty percentages for the districts rather than the free lunch students. So 1.07 is at the 0.484, which I believe has been in place the entirety of the time that KSEA has been in place. So as was mentioned, it was since at least 2018 that the 4.4 or 0.484 has been in place. To get to the poverty percentages, you can see in the final bullet point under model 1.07 on page 3, we talked about how they used the KLRD used the total adjusted enrollment, and then multiplied it by the district poverty level percentage from the U.S. Census small area income and poverty estimates for 2023. And then we applied the current factor of 0.484. Model 1.08 does the same thing, but changes the multiplier to 1.766. And this factor was created in order to ensure that the total state aid for at-risk remained at the same amount as was current. So it is a higher amount of money going in for, to maintain the same level of general funding that was going for at-risk weightings. So again, that's 1.766. So that uses the USD poverty instead of free lunch. And then 1.09 and 1.10 use an average of either free lunch or state assessments. So 1.09 is level 1, and 1.10 is 1 and 2. So just as we've done before, it just takes and does the average for the two different numbers combined together to come up with the end things. That was very vague right there, but you know, my brain stopped for a second and I panicked. I'm sorry, guys.
You're good. So, are we doing like an average for each district, or
Yes.
so taking the percentage of each district and saying, creating a statewide average from there? Is that what we did in that one?
So we took and did, for each school district, they got to take the average of the number of free lunch students and then their level 1 state percentage, the higher of the two still. We're still using the higher of either math or, and then it was calculated. Wow, I did not write this section completely well in your assessments coverage, I'm sorry. But yes, it's each district on its own was calculated as the average for it, not a statewide average that was then applied to each of the school districts. So each school district, the average of the two, not one for the entire state, applied across the board evenly to everybody.
Thank you. Any questions for Jenny on this one? Senator Petty. So Senator Hill, I'm sorry, Senator Hill, I forgot I had you in line.
Thank you. I guess this would go along with both Model 109 and 110. When you talk, so it's the average of free lunch in a specific school district.
Yes.
And you take the average of free lunch, well, 109, of free lunch in that specific school district, that would be based on the prior year.
Well, it's the average of the two items. So item 1 is free lunch, and item 2 is your state assessment, level 1 or levels 1 and 2. And so it's not the average number of free lunch students. It's the average of the two different numbers brought together.
Lord Almighty.
Senator Hill and then Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Jennifer, for presentation. I'm not actually confused as much as I think I am, but maybe I just don't know. The poverty level that we're talking about is the relative wealth of the district. Is that what, when the models, let me see, model 07 and 08, is that the relative wealth of the district? Is that what you're using for poverty level?
So we're using the information that comes from the U.S. Census small area income and poverty estimate, and then we're doing the percentage for the district based off of that.
So we're not using the asset valuation
No.
of the district. We're using income levels of the people that live in the district for those, right? Is that what you're telling me?
I believe that's correct. That's the U.S. Census's information, and it's been a minute since I looked at the actual document itself. But yes, that would be using the income of the people in the district, not the assessed valuation within the district.
Okay, can you explain to me then the vast variation between what we use as free lunch, which is supposed to be based off of people living in poverty. Then additionally, we had Title I, which was supposed to be based off of either free lunch or relative poverty. Why are those numbers all over the place?
So each of them has a slightly different basis to start from. When we talk about free lunch is not just the poverty level, it is a specific percentage above the poverty level. And I'm looking at Matt, who is ignoring me, so I don't know that I'm going to have the exact number for you right this second. But that is what the free lunch is based off of, is that specific dollar amount put up by the federal government for free lunch. Then you have the Title I percentage. And the Title I percentage, I was just looking this up myself, is focused using specifically census data for children ages 5 through 17 in poverty, and then state level per pupil expenditures is part of how they get to Title I percentages. So that is based specifically looking at the children in this specific area. When we were discussing the USD poverty versions of the models, the 1.07 and 1.08, that is just using the poverty percentages overall. That's not broken down into child versus adult. It's just the overall poverty percentages within that USD. So one uses the federal free lunch dollar requirements. The second is looking specifically at children who are in poverty. And the third is just using the overall poverty percentages within the district. Free lunch is at 130% of poverty, so.
So, I think I'm kind of understanding all that, but I feel like all of those figures should be essentially a factor of each other, depending on what that factor is. But my concern with this is it's like we have the presupposed notion that because, and Representative McDonald mentioned this earlier, presupposed notion that children that have relatively less wealth in their household are predisposed to poor performance, which I don't know that that's exactly true. And then we've got to figure out how to identify that. And it looks like no matter how we try to identify that, we're inaccurate. Wouldn't it seem like that funding at-risk kids that are actually not performing well, per se, on a third grade assessment might be a more accurate way to determine which kids are not performing well at a third grade assessment? Thank you.
Was there a question a statement more than a question? Okay, that's what I thought, but I just wanted to be sure. Representative McDonald and then Senator Petty. I skipped over Director Rucker and then Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm still trying to follow along a little bit behind. I feel like you might have said contradictory things, or I heard contradictory things, so I want to clarify. On Model 1.09 and 1.10, it's the higher of the two, or it's an average of?
It's a two-part. So when you look at the level 1 or the level 1 and 2 state assessment section, It is the higher of either math or ELA. So that is every single one of these models. When we're talking about state assessments, we are always talking about the higher of either math or ELA percentages. Then, once you have that determined, it's the average of free lunch and the whichever is higher of the state of the level 1 or the level 1 and 2. So 2 steps to get to for those models. They're just the options that were presented at the time. So, but that's how those models were concocted, were decided.
That clarification helps a little. I'm still a little fuzzy, but I think I have what I need to get myself back on track. But one thing you mentioned is the census form that I think you called it a poverty assessment per district. I was wondering if we could get a copy of that. I am really kind of having a hard time. I mean, even to rank districts by poverty is something that I think would be interesting to see when we're looking at this, and then correlate that with how much money we're talking about giving in addition or taking or giving.
So now may be a good time to talk about the overview models section so that you have an idea of that, since that is a new document as well. And then, of course, we'll be happy to go ahead and send out the 2023 U.S. Census Small Area Income and Poverty Estimate that we used for the base. That's not a problem. We can do that. But just so we cover what you're looking at in the white piece of paper that's in front of you, we did pull from every single one of the models what the total state foundation aid would be, the general fund transfers to at-risk, the total computed LOB, so for local option budget, the local option budget transferred to the at-risk fund, and then the total supplemental state aid that would go to, that goes to the districts. So each of these were presented in the models you received with each of your districts. So each district is laid out in the actual models. The overview is just to give you a high level. Here is what the state is looking at side by side with each of these models to hopefully help you look at it in a different way. We have also provided them in the bar charts down below. So you could, for each of those, so the first one is the total state foundation aid in green, and then total computed LOB in yellow, supplemental state aid in orange, and then the transfers are on the back side of it, and the general fund transfers are in blue, and the local option budget is in pink. Those colors are used across every single one of these overviews so that you can kind of see and get an idea of how each of the models would affect the individual, if with just the individual one. So, but when you're looking at all of them across the board, some people I know do not have, do not enjoy looking at all the numbers side by side and think a visual representation is better. So we were hoping that by providing those, you may get a different way of looking at it that you may not have considered before. But all of that information is also on each of the models that you were provided and are online right now currently. So.
Okay. I'm going to get back to our list of questions. Director Rooker and then Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think by way, just to help this committee understand the choices and the various the considerations taken to land where we are as we think about if and how we might want to update or change what we're doing. I'm gonna, and I don't know if it's our friends, it's probably the research staff, but I know our revisors were in the room as well. The 2017 K-12 Budget Committee received testimony from Scott Frank, who was then the head of LPA, when we were thinking about the at-risk weighting. And one of the formula bills that was submitted used the census data, and that was a huge point of concern expressed through the public testimony that was taken in. So we got a deeper dive into that calculate, and I think there are questions around the committee table about why this, not that. If that, then why isn't it this? And I think those are valid, but I think some of that got, if memory serves, some of that was addressed through an analysis of how those things get calculated. So I'm wondering if we could look for his testimony.
We can definitely take a look. Senator Petty.
I guess that does raise another question. So if the U.S. Census small area income and poverty estimate was used, and this is assessed for 2023, is that 2023 just as a selected number, or would that?
So the census, the most recent version of that when we were doing the models last year was the 2023 numbers. I do not remember if this is one of those that updates yearly or if it's so every 2 years. I'd have to go back and look at that. But the answer at the time was we were using the most up-to-date from the U.S. Census for the poverty levels for the percentages.
And then my second question was I know that we've had this ongoing conversation about whether free lunch is the good model to use. So we're looking at this with other things thrown in as, for example, the U.S. Census small area income and poverty estimate. So my question would be whether other states use this as a
So it is my understanding that there are states that use Title I and USD poverty. I'm not certain. I would have to go back and check about whether there are states that use their state assessment for that. The majority of the states use free lunch. So as it stands now, the majority of them currently use free lunch. And we can get you the number of states that do use and which ones. I believe that was in one of the documents last year, but we can absolutely get the numbers for you again.
I just wanted that reminder that the majority of the states do use free lunch and, for that. And then my last question was, when I look at these last two, Model 109 and 110, I'm just going to ask Dr. Harwood. So it seems to me that they add another level of complexity. So how would this make it more difficult for school districts to calculate on an annual basis?
Dr. Harwood.
So the calculation is pretty straightforward. You'd have to, it would have to be done the year before, so it'd have to be a prior year, because that's what you'd have to use the state assessments from the previous year, and then decide whether you use the free lunch from the previous year or the free lunch from the current year. You could do either one of them. But you're going to find two numbers and take the average and then calculate from there, so that it's not an overly complicated formula to do once you explain exactly where the numbers come from.
Okay, so I'm seeing it complicated, but you're saying it's not overly complicated.
The big difference here is this takes into account a poverty aspect and a performance aspect and tries to put them together. Back to Senator Hill's question, most states use poverty as a proxy for at-risk because there is a really high correlation between poverty and low performance. So that's been around for a long time. So I think that's where it started. This one actually tries to put those two things together. So you may have at-risk students that are not performing well, and that goes together with poverty to come up with something. So this, I don't know whose idea it was. It's a hybrid model between performance and poverty. Kansas used to have a low performance weighting, which was based on state assessments as well. So kind of goes along with what that was.
And Madam Chair, just also, does this then introduce a decision by a school district whether they use the ELA or the math?
I'll let Jenny ask that, but my memory was the higher of the two.
So when the models were run, it was run with the assumption that such as with bilingual, which we'll talk about here a little later, but bilingual would be a good example of this. Currently, bilingual is either done by hours or by student head count. And so the school district looks at which one is higher, and then that's how they get their funding. And so the same would be true here. It would be looked at, and the higher one would be the amount that would be used. So it's always the highest option of people who could be needing the money.
And then lastly, these, because it seems like maybe I was just hearing it, getting off track about how at-risk funding is used within a school district. The formula doesn't really change that.
So none of these models require, except for the ones where they pull at risk. So 1.0 and 1.01, both obviously, since you have no money coming in for at risk, no money could transfer to that specific account for that reason. The rest of them does not change that assumption that at-risk funding would still go to the at-risk fund in the school districts.
And none of these formulas change how currently district look at risk. It's not based on poverty, it's based on.
So at-risk funding is used for at-risk students.
Right.
And that does not change in any of these models. This is just the funding side, not the distribution side, would be changed. I did have a friend go ahead and give me an answer, so shout out to the awesome team downstairs. But of the states, 37 states do include a low-income funding in their primary funding model. And then of those 37 states, 19 use free or free and reduced lunch, 16 use a multiple, 6 use direct certification, 2 use just Census Bureau information, 1 uses federal Title I, and 1 uses the federal poverty guidelines. So the majority of those who are not using free or reduced lunch are using census data, usually around poverty. Of the 37 states that are including it in their base overall funding.
Thank you. We are getting considerably behind schedule, so I'm going to go to Senator Hill as my last person on this topic, and then we were scheduled for a break, so then we'll take the break, and then we'll resume where we are on the schedule. Senator Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to be relatively quick on this. I'm having some problems on this whole poverty thing, as you might have interpreted by now, and I think I really need some information. So Dr. Harwood made the comment that there's a high correlation between poverty and poor performance, and the problem I have with that is that we can't even define what poverty really is. We use free and reduced lunch as a proxy, and yet our legislative post-audit is showing us that correlation is not very good. We do not ask children how poor they are, and then plot their assessment scores against that. And I'm sorry, this really isn't a question for staff. This is a comment in general. If we have good, solid data of what the income level of the parents of the children are, which we don't, because we can't even find that out. As you remember some of the discussions during session this year, we don't even have that information. So for us to say that the performance of children is highly correlated to the net income of their parents is absolute, until I see some data that actually shows that, I am very hesitant to make policy based off of supposition that we don't know is even true. And if we look at it, if that is actually true, then why do we have a whole bunch of different at-risk categories? Why don't we just take what the net income of the parents are, and you qualify for at-risk if you're below a certain point, and you don't if you're above a certain point? So I think we need to be really cautious about using proxies for things. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Anything else? Okay, then go ahead and, yes, Jenny.
I have one more thing to add. It's apparently Alabama and DC also have in performance on state assessments as factors for the funding for at-risk. So there are 2 states, so every one of the models that you see here is a way that a state is using funding.
Thank you. Vice Chair Erickson, and then I'll make a comment, and then we'll take a quick break.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate Senator Hill's comments. My comment on this is, how is it working? We talk about the inputs, and we've spent a lot of time talking about how much money to put into it. We're not talking about what should be the expected outcome for the investment that we're putting in. So I want to ask staff, along with the information you're getting for us on where the .484 came from, in that discussion, we know that that's what is needed. That's the amount of money that's needed to get a student from not proficient to proficient in reading, in math. What should have been the expected outcomes for that .484? Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. And if we're using a proxy for performance, why aren't we using performance? That's kind of an interesting thought that came up through our discussion. So I think we have lots of things to get figured out. With that, we'll go ahead and take a 7-minute break. Thank you. I'm getting this call back to order. I forgot to bring Dad's gavel. He must have known because he called me during the meeting, so. But I don't think he's watching today. So we're going to try to get back on schedule here. I see a lot of value in the review that we're doing now because I definitely am realizing how rusty my memory was. Chapter 3 was handed out during our break of the West End study. So you have that on your desk, and I know we have a lot on your desk, so I just wanted to point that out to you. And we are, again, going to go through the review of the high-density at-risk weighting models. So Jenny, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, there are fewer high-density at-risk models, so maybe that will make things go a little bit faster for you all. For this, again, we have 2 documents for you, the overview page and then a blue page that says high-density at-risk weighting assumptions, just so you can have the 2 things side by side as you're reviewing it. And if you're wanting to take notes, high-density at-risk is on page 5 of the worksheet. Again, models 1 and 1.01 are if we remove the high-density at-risk weighting completely, and if we roll the high-density at-risk funding into base. For these 2, they also still continue to assume that there is an at-risk weighting that is continued on. So just the high-density at-risk weighting is removed. As a reminder for how the model or the high-density at-risk weighting works now, if your district at-risk population is at least 50%, the weighting is multiplied by, or the at-risk enrollment is multiplied by 0.185. And if your at-risk population is greater than 35%, but less than 50%, it's multiplied by 0.7. And then that amount, so it's 0.7, and it's times the at-risk enrollment. However, there is a subtraction amount for the percentage of students between the dollar. So for example, maybe this will be easier with an example. If you have 40% of is what you have, then you would take and you'd subtract 35%, so you'd have 5%. You'd multiply that 5% by the 0.7, and then you'd multiply it by the at-risk enrollment. So there is a mathematical equation. I would remind you the full equations are in the overall KLRD School Finance Systems memo. That is in your folders for tomorrow's stuff. So if you want that information for exactly how each of these formulas work, that is in your packet for you to be able to look at tonight for a refresher. But basically there's 2 options for high density at risk currently. And then there is also an option currently which allows high density at risk to be calculated at the individual school building level. So model 1.02 would be using just the building level and not the USDs. And then model 1.03 would be using just USDs. So we're taking out that if or option, the choose your option, which one you like better for this. That's what those 2 models do. They basically just use either building FTE or USD FTE. That's models 1.02 and 1.03. Happy to stand for questions on any of the 4 so far, or keep moving along to the changes in the percentages models.
Any questions for Jenny? Seeing none, Jenny, go ahead and proceed.
Sure. I do want to make a note that in the 1.01, when it was rolled into base, it does move base to 5498. So that's the percentage that would go up based on the high density at risk. Models 1.04 through 1.06 look at a difference in the changes for percentages. So 1.04, instead of it being 35 to 50 and then 50 above, it would change it to 40 to 55% and then 55% and above. Model 1.05 does 45 to 60% and then 60% and above. And then model 1.06 has 3 ranges rather than 2, and that would stay at the 35 to 50% and then 50 to 60% and then a 60% and above. And so that's a pretty high-level overview of the high-density at-risk weighting models, but those are the models specifically focused on high-density at-risk. Happy to stand for questions on any of those.
Questions? Comments? Oh, Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This refresher is really helpful, and I'm not sure I'm completely mentally caught up like I should be, but I did have in my notes from last time that my school districts have less money allocated in every one of these scenarios because they're large school districts. When I'm looking at these models where we say, like model 1.04 changed to 40 to 50% instead of 35 to 50%, are those arbitrary? Like, how did we come to those numbers? I can't remember.
Those numbers were provided by members of this committee that they were interested in, and so those are what we chose. Since those were numbers and ranges that were requested, we went ahead and used those as a basis to start with.
Okay. I guess I just really worry a lot about holding harmless, and I understand when we mess with one thing, it messes up other things, so we really have to keep the entirety in mind. But in this in particular, I've gotten a lot of feedback from our districts, our larger districts, particularly, like I'm from Olathe, and so we have at a building level, higher levels in some rather than others. So I really appreciate that we have that building level built in. I'm going to have to digest this a little bit more tonight before I can speak any more articulately than that.
Thank you.
And it may be helpful to mention, I also, in your packet, you have 2 combination ones where it combines at-risk and high-density at-risk weightings, like the numbers for those together, and that is next in your packet. So for these, we looked at both weightings removed, and then remove both weightings but roll them into base. And so those 2 are combined. And so just as an overall, if you're curious if you're talking, because right now we've talked individually about at-risk and then the high-density at-risk, and the high-density at-risk does cover the populations which exceed 35% of districts' enrollment for let me rephrase that. School districts with populations of at-risk students that exceed 35% of the district's enrollment, and that's when the high-density weighting kicks in for those. And so you have 3 different sets that we've talked about here. With me standing up here, just at-risk, high-density would stay in, high-density at-risk being removed, but the at-risk would stay in, and then this one that has the 2 of them with just the base assumptions where they'd be pulled out or be rolled into base. So Matthew's going to come up and talk about a different something with at-risk and success models here in just a second, but that's kind of the covering of mine, and so I'm happy to stand for questions on anything with at-risk we've talked about so far.
Senator Petty.
Thank you. On the high-density at-risk weighing assumptions in the last one, which is model 1.06, with that change to have now, if I'm understanding this correctly, 3 percentage possibilities, 35 to 50, 50 to 60, and over 60. Does that then change the percentage amount in any way?
It doesn't change the percentage amount. It does change the factors, which I didn't get written in here, but I'd be happy to go look those up for you real quick so you can all write down those factors. I'll do that while Matthew is presenting about at-risk and success weightings. But I did thank you for noting that I forgot to put those factor changes in. But yes, it would make 3 factor changes for those 3 percentage sections.
Thank you.
Dr. Harwood.
So it's a math question. On 1.0 on the overview sheet, trying to figure out how we can remove both weightings and the foundation goes up by $105 million. Shouldn't it go down by $594 million?
I can go back and look at the actual model for that.
Yeah. Because if you're not redistributing it, it should go away instead of actually increase, so.
I may have mistyped a number in there when I was putting it in, but I will go check on that.
Any other questions for Jenny on this? Vice Chair Erickson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a real quick question, Jenny. So how much are we currently spending, if I'm doing the math right, on high density at risk?
Oh, that is not one of the columns I put right up here on the top of your overviews. That's super helpful. I will make sure we get that information for you.
I think it's around 80 million, but I may not be remembering. 87 million, I thought, was about that much. My other question is, are we seeing any evidence of impact that high-density at-risk weighting makes a difference in student outcomes? Is there any tangible evidence of that? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Jenny, is that something that you guys looked at?
That is not something that KLRD has looked at specifically. We're happy to work in conjunction with KSD and see if there is anything, but we do not have something currently on that.
Okay, thank you. And I don't think I see any other hands. So Jenny, thank you very much. And we'll put Matthew on the hot seat now.
Good afternoon again, Madam Chair, members of the task force. To answer a follow-up question for FY25, high density at risk was, I believe, 77.4 million is about the amount attributable to that weighting. All right, so I have the last bit of at risk, which is going to be the overview sheet that says at risk and success weightings. So first, I do want to note that I made an error in that total state foundation aid column for 1.03. So when you were looking at that one, I'll get it updated and sent out, but it should be it should be 4,448,935,577. So I will get that corrected. But in general, the concept behind these weightings that I'm talking about is both altering how at-risk is done to being focused on state assessment outcomes, and then also introducing a new weighting that for purposes of this model was dubbed as success weighting to address questions of districts having students that move on as far as achieving a level 3 or 4, and them then losing that funding for that student no longer meeting the qualifications of these proposed at risk. So starting off with model 1.02. So this one is taking the same factor, the same kind of structure of the current at risk, and saying instead of being free lunch qualification, it is taking the higher of the district's level 1% on ELA or math onto their adjusted FTE, and then using that. And so saying that if the district has 100 FTE and their level 1% for ELA was 38, then it would be 38 FTE multiplied by that factor to get that. Then additionally, the success weighting is taking a factor of half of the at-risk. So if you're doing 0.484, it would be 242, and applying that for the percentage of the district for students that are achieving levels 3 and 4. So essentially saying if the students are achieving 3 or 4, they are deemed, again, whether you want to say proficient, success, whatever verbiage, and so they will get a lower weighting, but an additional weighting onto that. And so what you will see in the overview is largely, and I'll kind of run through, they all are just slightly tweaking kind of some of the parameters, but in general, most of these overviews are going to have the same or less than current funding for at-risk, but several of them outside of the last two will be a net increase because you will have additional funds with this success weighting. I would also note in looking at it, I know Jennifer had brought up earlier about the required transfers for at-risk. Obviously, there would be kind of policy decisions in creating a weighting, but if you slotted these models in as it exists now, the other component with the success weighting is it would be discretionary and that it would not have the requirements of at-risk funds of going into a specific fund that can be only expended for specific purposes. So then, yes, so back to 1.02, that is just putting all of the kind of current factors across the board for at-risk. 1.03 is bringing the at-risk funding up to a current level. So you will note where keeping it at its current weighting, you see the at-risk, the amount of state aid generated by the at-risk weighting decreasing. Number 3 uses the same weighting factor that Jennifer had talked about earlier, so that it would bring up the at-risk funding to current, and then you would have the addition of the success weighting on top of that. 1.04 tweaks things so that the at-risk is levels 1 and 2, while again maintaining success at 3 and 4. And then 5 and 6 are essentially repeating some of the ones earlier, except for they are adjusted in a way to maintain current, so that both the at-risk and success weightings for those models in summation are the same, the 584 million. So essentially not increasing the total state spend, but dividing the at-risk funding between the at-risk and success weighting. And then my final note before I'll stand for questions is just that none of this touches high density at risk. So for the purpose of these models, it is only addressing at risk. It is not touching whether high density would change, stay the same, anything like that. So with that, I'm happy to stand for questions. I know this one is a little bit different or a little bit more by adding in kind of this whole new weighting.
Thank you. Do you have questions for Matthew? Senator, Vice Chair Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Matthew, on the 2 models that you've talked about so far, earlier we were talking about the importance of measuring individual student growth. How do these 2 capture individual student growth or bodies of student growth in the definition of success?
Madam Chair, Senator, thank you for that question. So these current models would really only capture growth as far as a student going from level 2 to 3, because that would then transfer them from an at-risk weighting to a success weighting. The way these current models are built, there is no mechanism for rewarding or measuring growth within a level or between, say, 1 and 2 or anything like that. Obviously, that could be built in into a model to account for some of that, but these specific ones are only accounting for the outcome of what level the student is in.
And so we call it success, but if a student went from level 4 to 3, they would still get success weighting.
Correct.
How was that success?
I would note the term was largely a placeholder to have something there. Again, you could name it whatever you would, whatever the decision is on the verbiage for the weighting.
I could absolutely see in these models, if we moved a student, particular student, from level 2 to 3, that's a success, and you're moving them out of the lower 2 into a proficiency standard. But just to give a success weighting to kids who are already in 3 or 4, and they could even drop, I don't know that that's the direction we would want to go. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Senator Petty.
On these models for at-risk and success weighting, none of them are done that the district would have the option by building.
So, Madam Chair, Senators, so the way these are done is taking the district as a whole. So no, there is no building option per like a high density. This is treating just more the at-risk, which currently is just the district's aggregate number. So this is essentially taking the percentage. You could do the number, but for the sake of our calculations, we had access to the percentage. So again, the district has 100 FTE of students. We see that last year, their highest level 1 percentage between the two tests for all students was 42%. So the calculations in these just takes the 100 adjusted FTE, multiplies it by that level 1 percentage, says, okay, then 42 FTE, and then factors and goes on. So it is at a district level, again, aggregating for all grades and everything. You could absolutely get more granular into, again, different subgroups or grades or things like that. But for the sake of these models, it is what is their percentage for the district level for all students, all subgroups, essentially kind of what is the highest aggregation that we could get of that percentage.
And did you make a comment about something about not spending more state money?
So the models 1.05 and 1.06 are ones where both the success weighting and the at-risk weighting add together to be the current level of at-risk. And so there would be, under those models, there is no increase to the overall state foundation aid that the state would be providing, whereas in 1.02 through 1.04, you do see differences. Largely, you see increases because you are adding this success weighting, and in some instances, some is being offset by at-risk, but not the total of it. So those are the two that just essentially said, what if the weightings were divided up between the existing funding for at-risk?
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we will move on.
Brilliant.
I'm sorry. Revisor Long?
Madam Chair, just to follow up on an earlier question, after research, the question was asked about the origination of the .484 at-risk weighting. In 2006, the Legislative Post audit was directed to conduct a cost study of public education. Under their at-risk portion of that cost study, they proposed a weighting of .484. At the legislature at the time adopted an at-risk weighting of .456 instead. Then during discussions during the debate by the K-12 Budget Committee in 2017 for the new school finance formula, Scott Frank, the Legislative Post Auditor at the time, presented to the committee on that 2006 cost study and again identified the .484 at-risk weighting. We can give the task force the testimony of Mr. Frank from that committee meeting if the chair thinks it'd be useful for this task force to review that.
Thank you, Jason. Senator Erickson, did that answer your question, or did you have any follow-up? Okay, thank you. Matthew, you had reached the end of your presentation, correct? Okay.
Madam Chair, yep, on that one, I have the next model as well,
All
or the
right,
next set
so
as well.
you are reviewing the bilingual weighting models. So Matthew, go ahead and
Awesome.
proceed, please.
Thank you much. So you will see, you should have both the overview as well as the blue assumption sheet for the bilingual models. Again, to date, we have had 6 bilingual models that we have run and provided for the task force. The first one being just removing the weighting entirely. The second one being to remove the weighting and roll that funding into base. The second one being to have only count hours rather than the greater of hours or students enrolled in. So 2 is hours with a factor of 0.2. Number 1.03 is only hours with a factor of 0.395. 1.04 is using only head count, so the number of students enrolled in a bilingual class, but not necessarily differentiating for how much service they receive, with a factor of 0.185. And then the final one, 1.05, is a two-weighting factor that differentiates based upon whether the student is classified as a newcomer, at which point they are given the factor of 0.395, and then the rest, or any other student, which is 0.185. And so they all are going to vary a little bit, with obviously no bilingual weighting being less state foundation aid than current, rolling it into base, maintaining the same level, and then the only using any of the only hours or only head count would decrease state foundation aid, and the two weighting one would slightly increase state foundation aid, so be a little bit more than the current weighting as well. You will see some of that represented on the charts. I'm happy to go through more of the assumptions, or again, kind of answer questions, but mostly it has been kind of an either or, and then that one with the newcomer that actually introduces more of a kind of new or different component to the current system.
Matthew, could you please refresh my memory what the current weighting is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the current weighting, for bilingual, so for hours, if you were using the hours based, is the FTE times 0.395, and then for the head count calculation, it is 0.185. So those are the current ones.
Thank you, Matthew. Do we have other questions? Representative Steele.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Matthew, what is the difference between the two currently?
Madam Chair, Representative, so the districts will take the greater of either. They can, it's basically the number of students that they have enrolled in an approved bilingual program, or the FTE enrollment of the approved bilingual program, which as FTE is essentially capturing the amount of service hours given to students. And so it is basically, do they provide more services to the students than they have kind of the amount of students, or do they have a lot, say, a lot, or the amount of students they have are all relatively require few services, and so they might generate more money, more funding through the head count of how many are in the program rather than the amount of services they're providing through them. So it's services versus number of students, essentially.
Yes, you may.
Do we have any data to show how many bilingual students are on special education? Because they would get both weightings.
Madam Chair, Representative, I can double check and see what's there. I don't know that it is anything that I have definitely not on hand or that I've seen, but we can do some digging and see.
One more.
Before we do, I want to help you follow up on that one. Dr. Harwood, in our Kansas lookup, and I'm not calling it a CUME folder, in our lookup, is that a number that we can filter and determine how many students fall in both categories?
Yes, but I would say that special education is not a student-based weighting. It's a reimbursement for services. And so the services can't be billed to both funds. So there would be no overlap between that. So but yes, we can figure out, the first thing is that in order for a student that doesn't have English as a first language, the first thing you have to figure out, is it a language barrier or a disability? So, but yes, they can be both. The number is pretty small.
Yeah, we have that number.
Yeah.
Thank you. Representative Steele?
Right. I knew that the SPED wasn't a weight. I'm just curious how much of a crossover districts are getting with that. I mean, we're constantly being told we're not funding special education. So I'm just curious the crossover of that. And then is there a specific law that requires bilingual funding, or how did that ever get originated into the actual current funding formula? I just don't remember.
Would one of our revisers like to answer that? And it looks like they may want to look a few things up before they answer you that. We can, in the meanwhile, we'll take another question and come back to that. And Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I noticed that we use the word newcomer in several places here, and KLRD did give us a document explaining what newcomer means in different states. And I think if I could suggest that we as a task force come up with a definition that we all agree at some point that newcomer means, I think that would be helpful in calculating and helping districts understand what money's coming or is not coming and what the criteria would be.
Dr. Harbert, I believe that the state has a operating definition.
So we just use the federal definition, which is 1 year from the date of entry into the country, but that's because we don't use it for funding. Other states do 1 to 3 years, and it's based on the date that the student comes into the country. The reason we don't use that is that typically a newcomer is going to have more time with a licensed bilingual student, so that's captured in the hours portion of it. If we moved away from the hours portion of it, that's what we've talked about, is that a two-tiered weighting of newcomers versus non-newcomers is pretty common from state to state.
And with our lookup, would we be able to determine what the actual current number of newcomers is versus students who've been here a greater time than the newcomer?
So we would be able to determine that. It's not actually, you're talking about something that's in KIDS, and we're still using KIDS officially. So, but yes, we can do it based on the federal definition, which is 1 year. We actually did it for 2025 for 3 years as well. It's not something we typically keep, but if you have the entry date and the current date, you can figure it out.
To your recollection, is that what was given to research to calculate the models they calculated? And Matthew may want to help. You may want Matthew as a phone a friend this time.
It's Matthew's data. He should answer the question.
Madam Chair, so in the assumptions document, so newcomer for the purposes of model 1.05 is 1 year. I would have to double check if we ran one with 3, but I believe we had just stuck with the 1 year again for purposes of this model. Always happy to do additional ones if this is a route that the task force is interested in.
I'm also interested in the number of students who are on maintenance, of bilingual students who are just on maintenance.
So just so I can understand, so a bilingual student is either a bilingual student or they have exited. And so we don't, so we can do newcomer because we have to report that federally. Otherwise, you are a bilingual student until you've passed the KILPA.
So I am recollecting a conversation from last year where we said some students are kind of monitored. Okay. And are we counting them when we count a waiting for them? And so I guess that student is under the time. How are we attributing time to that student?
So the time is the amount of, so the time is based on when they are being served by a bilingual licensed staff member. And so that's where the time comes from. There was a change made a few years ago that it used to be you had to have proficient on the KILPA 2 years in a row in order to exit. That's changed, was 1 year, so that year that you're proficient, that next year can be a monitoring year. So we can get you those numbers.
Thank you. And when do we count testing that student towards time serving a student?
Well, that'd be kind of difficult. So The time is based on their enrollment on September 20th. And so if they're taking the test during the time that they were enrolled with that person in February when they take it, then I guess technically yes. But the time is based on who the person they are enrolled with and their licensure on September 20th.
Thank you. Senator Erickson, and then back to Representative McDonald, and then we'll go to the answer for Representative Steele. Senator?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And you started touching on one of the questions I had, which was the monitoring. So help me understand. One, I'd like to know how many students are in the monitoring. They've passed the KELPA. They're no longer considered a student who qualifies for receiving services, but we're monitoring. So during that monitoring, the district is getting the funding as if that student were bilingual. Is that, or receiving ESOL services? Is that, am I understanding correctly?
Only if they are continuing to receive ESOL services for that year after they've tested proficient. So if they've exited and they're not receiving services, then they would not receive funding.
What would define receiving services? As I recall, when I was at a school and students were doing this, they might touch base with their former ESOL teacher and they say, hey, are you doing okay? You need anything? No, I'm good, and off they go. Is that, and if they've passed the KELPA, why would they still need to be receiving services? I'm trying to understand and where does the authority for that monitoring year come? I'm looking at the revisers. Is that in statute? That once they pass the KELPA, that there's a year of monitoring that is funded? Is that in statute?
No, that's not in statute that we are aware of. That's in the agency's rules, regulations, and policies that are implementing those statutory provisions.
Okay, so it's in rules. Where's the funding for that monitoring year coming? Because they're still receiving that waiting. Where's that waiting? Where's that money coming from for that monitoring year?
So it's just, I mean, it's coming from via the statute, essentially. It's either determining the FTE who are of students who are in approved programs of bilingual education, or the number of students enrolled in approved programs in bilingual education. So those approved programs are once approved by the State Board of Education.
Okay, I'd like to have more information on how many students, what services they're being provided, and what programs they're participating in for that funding. So that would be very helpful. Madam Chair, if I may, my second question is, what is the average length of time a student receives services? Do we have that?
Madam Chair, Senator, I do not have it offhand. I can double check and see if that was something that we had dug into last year and follow up or try and get the information.
I think that'd be very interesting to see the length of time, average length of time that a student is in, and might even be helpful to see that by district. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Representative McDonald.
As someone who's taught ELL K-12 and currently teaches in higher ed, I think that much of that's determined by the amount of schooling the person has before they come here. And so the reason I keep harping on this definition of newcomer, and I'm kind of dissatisfied with the federal definition, if you get a 10th grader here from a war-torn African country who's never held a book, it's going to take them longer on average to catch up. And so what I hear from educators, whether it's special ed or ELL, is that they want this formula to adequately represent how much money it takes to educate the kid. And so if we are making broad generalizations and just arbitrarily saying, well, if they've been a year and a day, they're no longer a newcomer, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're taking less time with a teacher to get caught up. So I guess I would just restate, I'm not thrilled with the federal definition. I appreciate that many other states, Alaska, California, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Oregon, Rhode Island, Tennessee, and Utah have different definitions than the feds. And I would really like for us to look more closely at that. And then as far as how long the average stay is in the ELL class, the last thing that generally comes along is the writing component when it comes to mastery. And so I think the thinking behind that year where you kind of keep an eye on them just in case is that the difference between the end of third grade and the end of fourth grade is really vast. And so if someone exits the end of third grade, but still has a little more trouble coming along when the workload is higher in fourth grade, that's an example of when they might reach back in and reassess and make sure that they really have exited.
Thank you. And then we will answer Representative Steele's question now.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the task force. The bilingual weighting has been in existence since the initial base plus weightings formula was enacted in 1992, to the extent that there was some specified bilingual education funding prior to 1992. We would have to look into that and do further research. There is no legal requirement to fund bilingual education or provide bilingual education. However, there is, based on case law, including U.S. Supreme Court decisions, a risk to school districts if they do not provide education in either the native language of the student or provide bilingual education programs and services to assist that student in learning English. Deprivation of that could result in liability for denial of equal educational opportunities under both federal statute and potentially the U.S. Constitution.
Thank you. Representative Steele, did that answer your question? Okay. Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to flip a little bit the other way. What if a student has been taking the CALPA for multiple years and not been able to pass, but they also have qualified on IEP for literacy, and that's a lot. Is there anything that says after so many years the CALPA is dropped off and it's just special ed?
Madam Chair, Representative, I would defer to KSDE if Dr. Harwood or Mr. Moore, if they have a response. If not, we are happy to follow up. I am not aware of anything as far as those provisions go, but would be happy to research it.
Dr. Harwood.
So I'd have to look at, this is going to be a very specific case. And so the IEP team is looking at, and they could look at oral language instead, is the understanding of English what's causing the issue, or is it something else like dyslexia or something else along the way? And so they would have, that's what they would be looking at to see if bilingual services were still helpful, but if, and if the, the CALPA has a reading component to it, so that's going to be really difficult to parse out. I just, there's no other way to say that. If, when you're trying to assess oral written language and English wasn't the first language, there is a time where you have to figure out, is this a language acquisition problem or is this a learning disability of some sort? And that's, I don't have a great answer for you other than it's going to be really tough to figure out.
Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what if, to qualify with the home language survey, a student has to have someone in the home that speaks another language, correct? What if that student learned English from the beginning also and didn't speak the other language, but yet qualifies for the CALPA and such because in the home there's another language? And then they're also on an IEP for literacy. How is the CALPA benefiting them? I'm confused there.
So so the home language survey, when the parents fill that out, depending on how they answer the questions, would start a screening process. And so if the student never knew the other language and has only spoken English, then they wouldn't necessarily move into even getting screened with the CALPA screener. So they may. It kind of depends on where you're at with that. If they can't, I mean, so if they don't pass the screener and they move into bilingual, but later on you figure out that it's really not a language acquisition issue, it's a learning disability, there would have to be that transition. With a student that you've just met, figuring out where that is going to take some time.
Thank you for that. I'm just proposing that it's been a while. The student is upper elementary. They've been here, and they're still taking the KELPA and on an IEP. I mean, how long do we keep that going?
I think the IEP team could determine that they shouldn't take the KELPA anymore and that it's not a language acquisition issue. So when they have the IEP team can make a lot of decisions in that realm.
Director Rooker, and then Senator Petty, and then we'll move along.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The existence of a federal definition has me wondering why the feds have a definition. It seems to me, and I would feel, it would be helpful if we could get some information about, it seems like case law is based on the Federal Civil Rights Act, Title VI, and I don't know the current status of that, but maybe it might be helpful for us to understand what is federally required. That is the basis of most of the case law, as I understand it.
Thank you. Senator Petty.
I just wanted to be clear, Matthew, so with the assumptions that we have here, there is no longer a model that has the ability to use services or the number of students.
Madam Chair, Senator, yes, I believe out of all of the models provided, they are all showing scenarios which are either one or the other, or in the case of the final one providing kind of a two-tiered element, but one that is still based upon the students and not so much the number of service hours. So yes, it would just be kind of a one element rather than the either or.
So we know, this does not have current.
Madam Chair, Senators, so at the very top of the overview sheet, you're going to see what the current amounts of spending are for it. There's nothing listed out kind of in the assumptions or anything about how the current formula is done. That is going to be in our finance memo that I believe is in your day 2 portion of the folders that would explain how it's currently done. But yes, in the models, they're all different or kind of alternative options.
Thank you.
And remember, we haven't made any decisions, so just because you see a model doesn't mean that we're going to use it, or just because you don't see a model doesn't mean we wouldn't use it. I think these were questions that as we discussed last year, we kind of generated, so there's always room for more. Any other questions for Matthew? Matthew, thank you very much. And our next is the review of low enrollment weighting models from Jenny.
Hello again, everyone. So we're going to move off of bilingual into enrollment discussions. The first group is low enrollment weightings. So with low enrollment, again, as always, models 1.0 and 1.01 are the same, where they either remove it entirely or roll the funding into base. If low enrollment is rolled into base, it'd be 5,749. This does indicate that high enrollment would still be included as a weighting in the ones in front of you for low enrollment. So, outside of those, models 1.02 to 1.04 take and change the amounts for what is considered a low enrollment school. So for 1.02, that moves to below 500. For 1.03, it moves to below 1,000, and 1.04 moves to below 1,900. Just as a reminder, the low enrollment weighting as it stands currently is if there is less than 100 students, there is a specific percentage, and then there is for between 100 and 300, there is a formula, and then 300 to 1622. So in total, low enrollment currently goes up to 1622. And so these numbers would change low enrollment to be below 500, to be below 1,000, or be below 1,900 instead of 1602. As far as the rest of the assumptions, I'm losing my papers left and right here. I don't believe that the calculation percentages for the factors changed at all with what we were doing. It was just the high end of the number is what we were using for this. So if you want the exact numbers, they're the same as what is currently being used, just changing the final, what you're considering the high end of low enrollment. So that is low enrollment factors on their own, not considering high enrollment at all. Happy to stand for questions on low enrollment or move on to the high enrollment section.
We'll pause here for questions. Dr. Harwood?
I would just say this is an example of the phase-in thing we talked about, and I'll just use the examples that were used. So it's currently at 1622, and if you wanted to get to 500, you could say that, well, for 28, we're staying the same. For 29, we're going to 1,000, and for 30, we're going to 500. That would give districts a chance as that phases in. I mean, so the law would be the same, and you just have years in there. Not suggesting anything but that's just an idea of when you look at how that impacts districts, and they may be, because now you need to make decisions about staffing and several other things as you're moving along. So that would just be one way a phase-in could work.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on low enrollment? All right. Jenny, thank you. Why don't you, I'm sorry. Vice Chair Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. What's the smallest district that we have enrollment-wise?
I believe it's something like 35.
So we have a district with 35 students. What's the mean size?
I would have to do some math to get to that.
500 something?
So the mean is right below 500. The district with 35 is closing as of June 30th. So the smallest district is actually, this is their last year.
What's our next smallest?
I think it's in the 70s.
For a district?
Yes, for the entire
And the
district.
mean is right around 500, and then the average is about 1,600. Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So it's been a while, and I know we can get this off the legal max, but can we get the enrollment of all of our districts, like the 286 in the last maybe 3 to 4 years, to see those trends? Because we know that enrollment is down for many reasons. But I don't remember when we last got that, or if Frank could send us a link on how we could get that data, because I'd like to see it with actually the last 5 years would be great.
Madam
Dr.
Chair, I'd
Harwood?
have a follow-up question on that.
Okay.
My question would be is, are you wanting, when you say you want the numbers, are you wanting the adjusted FTE? Are you wanting the final weighted FTE? When we say what number, what are you looking for a 5-year?
I thought you were asking for head count.
I was asking for a head count.
So you want-
FTE, I think if you provided one column for maybe the average FTE of those 5 head counts, then we could actually kind of compare, at least you'd have one FTE count.
So head count and FTE are not the same thing.
Right.
So I just
Head
want to make
count.
sure that what we're providing is what you're looking for. So in the enrollment numbers, it is not based on head count, it is based on FTE. So would you like what would help you with the enrollment, or would you like both? I'm happy to do it, I just want to make sure we're providing what you are looking for.
Thank you, and I appreciate the department's attention to detail. Let's go ahead and take both. I think both numbers are very helpful. Dr. Harwood, I think you were going to say something.
It's just, which one of the numbers, because there's the adjusted, which includes pre-K, there's a regular FTE, those are all in the legal maxes that go across there. The other thing I would say is that what Jen will be able to provide is audited numbers for the last 5 years, but for 2026, there will still be unaudited numbers because the audits are still ongoing. So that, just remember that the last year is still subject to change because the audits are still ongoing.
Thank you, I appreciate that reminder. Vice Chair Erickson.
And I appreciate, just to make sure, my numbers, like the smallest district, 35, that's head count. The mean is
That is FTE, because
FTE.
that is what we use for enrollment.
I want, so we have a district with fewer than 35 students currently, and the one that's 70, that's FTE.
So
I want head count. I want to know how many students are in some of these districts. And FTE, both would be great.
And that's what we've said. We'll
Thank
get,
you, Madam.
We'll
Thank
get
you, Madam
both. Jennifer?
So I would also remind you the difference between head count and FTE currently. So head count would be as if I was playing Duck, Duck, Goose in this room, and I could go around and I could touch everybody's head right this second we are sitting in the room. So FTE is done on the amount of time they are here. So if we have 2 of the task force members step out while I'm running around playing Duck, Duck, Goose, counting everybody's heads, they would not be counted in head count, but they would be counted for that FTE for the time they were here. So it is possible that there are school districts that have more head count, but less FTE because their head count is higher because they are just there in the building, but they are not there for the full school day, so they are not counted as a full FTE.
So a part-time student is a 0.5 in your head count, is what you're trying to caution us.
I'm just making sure we have the difference clear between head count and FTE.
Then I think, based on the questions that have been asked, I think, and I'll let Senator Erickson speak for herself, but I think she's wanting the number of full and part-time students in a district, and that's what you're considering head count?
Yeah, I want the head count. And I know there's head count, FTE, weighted FTE.
Yes.
I want head count and FTE. That'll show us which ones have actually more students, and if they're part-time or whatever. That'll give us the information I want. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome, Senator Petty. Sorry, Dr. Harwood. We'll let ladies go first, and then we'll come back to you.
So mine's short, just for the smallest, for the 20 smallest school districts, you also include what distance it is to the next school district.
So to be clear, for the 20 smallest school districts, we would like an estimate, because it's going to have to be an estimate and what we estimate off of. So for example, we could do from the school district's head building to the next school district's head building, because I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to get you a quick turnaround from which one is closest to the next school.
No, I from board office to board office.
Board office to board office.
Thank you, because I was about to clarify that too, because you can be on the border and be close to one, and you can be in the center and really far away from another. So, Dr. Harwood.
I just wanted to point out that, so this year we have 285 districts because we had a district close last year. And next year we'll have 284. The district that has 35 now had over 100 2 years ago. And so when they started the closure proceedings, they lost a lot of students pretty fast. And so, that happened quickly, and it does when districts make decisions. The other data point that might be helpful is the square miles of the district. Just because one of the things we talked about is sparsity versus just enrollment. But I also believe that the distance to, especially from one high school to the next, are big determiners on how long small districts can continue to stay small districts. Because one of the things that happens is that when families see the opportunities in the next district and it's only 10 miles away, that's when they start making those decisions, especially at the high school level. But the district that has 35, it's taken them a while to get to that point, but they are closing.
Jenny, let's take that suggestion and add the square miles per district. Dr. Harwood, I'm curious about something. Of the smaller districts, how, and the other superintendents are very welcome to provide what they know anecdotally as well. How much sharing of resources, sharing the transportation director or the food director is going on in our smaller districts?
So outside of special education, which there is a lot of sharing between co-ops and our locals, we have small districts that actually contract out whole grade levels. So you'll have a district that actually only has K through 5 in the district, and then they go to another district for secondary, or just high school if they have K through 8. So there's some of that going on. The rest of it, we have districts that share superintendents. So when you get really small, you probably don't have a transportation director. So now you have one person that just shares a whole bunch of jobs, and then that's how they have a full-time job instead of a part-time job.
Okay, thank you. Director Rucker.
Just a clarifying question. So in that scenario, thinking about the request for data, if a district has K through 5, and then Contra sends kids out for 6 through 12, and we're asking for head count enrollment, where is it counted? How is it accounted for?
So they are counted in their district of residence, and the funding goes to the district of residence, and then they have a contract with another district that they then pay to provide those other grade levels of education.
So to be clear,
Yes.
we account for it without double dipping in terms of counting.
If you have a contract for grade levels, the district of residence receives the funding. Now, they may have students that have open enrolled into the other district, but then they're counted in the other district. They're not counted in their district of residence.
If we could footnote such instances as, high schools contracted out on those counts, I think that would be helpful. Any other questions for?
That will take a little bit longer because I don't think KLRD has that information, but we can get it to them tomorrow.
Okay, very good. Let's do what we can do and then add supplement. All right. Any other questions for Jenny on our low enrollment? Okay, Jenny, thank you so much. And if you'd like to move to our high enrollment weightings.
Absolutely. So for high enrollment, as it stands now, if there are schools with greater than 1622 students, they are in high enrollment and they get the high enrollment factor. So just as a refresher for how high enrollment currently works. Same as with all of them, 1.0 and 1.01 are there, and then 1.2 and 1.3 take, instead of the 1622, it moves to the 1900. 1.02, there was a question at some point at the very beginning of last interim, if we went back to the original numbers that we were using for each of these weightings, what would that look like? And so high enrollment is one of those ones where we did do this, and then the task force was like, actually, we don't think that's the direction we want to go. But it is a model we produced for you, so we're providing that information. The 1996 multiplier is 0.009031. And then the high enrollment above 1900 at the current multiplier, and the current multiplier is 0.03504. So, and then the 1.04, there was discussion last year about that the high enrollment and the low enrollment all ran together. So the low enrollment, as you remember, goes to 1622. High enrollment starts at 1622, and so it all went together. And so there was a question and a request for what if we did for school districts that were extremely outside of what the amount was for, so there'd be a middle section. So there'd be the low enrollment weighting, and then a middle section that would not get an enrollment weighting, and then a high enrollment section. And so that's where the high enrollment above 10,000 came from. I believe this is about 15 school districts, but I'll double check how many school districts actually would get that money at that point. I'm getting a head shake from Dr. Harwood, so my memory of how many school districts that was is not correct. And I'll get you the correct number of how many school districts that would have been with above 10,000.
Let's just pop quiz Dr. Harwood.
I'm going to guess 5. Dr. Gibson's district is probably right at the 10, and they're at 7,500. So, yeah.
Thank you.
But we'll get you the final actual number once I sit back down, or tomorrow morning. So that is high enrollment on its own. I'll remind you, this is again individual separate from low enrollment. So this would be including that low enrollment would still be in effect for these models. It's just high enrollment that would be changed. Happy to stand for questions on high enrollment or move to the final model section, which is the combination of high and low enrollment.
Before you go, I'm going to throw you a curveball and go back to the previous data request. As long as we're calculating the number of square miles, could we also tell us the number of students per square mile? Let's do that both head count and FTE. That just occurred to me that I think that would be helpful. Dr. Harwood?
So just because the sparsity piece gets in there, this will be the students that attend that district. And so if you start comparing the population density that you might get from someplace else in this, if you have a net increase of students through open enrollment, you're going to have a higher student per your sparsity actually goes down. So just at some point you want to talk about how you count resident and non-resident students. I think for this point, your idea is just how many students are there regardless of how they got there. I think that's a good place to start.
Let's exclude the open enrollment in that number.
That is going to take them longer to do because they don't have that. We'd have to have that data out based on district of residence. But so I think that if you want to look at it quickly, I would do it the way it is, but it's the way you've talked about it. But that is students that are enrolled in that district. We can get to it. I just don't know that we can get to it tomorrow, that we can start looking at a comparison of density with resident and non-resident students.
So let's do what we can do for tomorrow and then supplement with the more accurate look, because I think the first view gives us an idea, and then we'll get more accurate numbers. So Jenny, now that I threw you a curveball, let's get you back on to model 1.04. I think that's where you left off.
Yes, so thanks to Matthew, I can tell you there's 6 school districts that are above 10,000. So that would significantly drop the number of schools that would be able to receive high enrollment. Again, that was a model created by KLRD off of a request from a member of this task force to see about a spaced area, which is not captured in either high or low enrollment. So those are the models for high enrollment on its own. If there are no questions, I'll go to the last model section we're going to talk about today.
Jenny, we're going to go to Vice Chair Erickson before you move on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just real quickly, Jennifer, and I don't know if you'll have the answer to this, but what is the rationale behind high density weighting, or high enrollment weighting? I'm sorry, high enrollment weighting. I think we all understand the purpose behind low enrollment weighting. What's the reasoning for high enrollment weighting?
So, Madam Chair, I cannot speak to what the legislative intent was when they created the high enrollment weighting. However, I can say that I have had in discussions with superintendents of larger schools that running a school with those students has cost more because it's above what the average amount is. And so the weighting is for at least 2 principals that I've talked to has been a help for them to make sure that the students are getting what they are needing. So that is just from conversations with superintendents. I would defer to our members here on the task force who obviously have different perspectives, but that's from my conversations with superintendents. It has been helpful for at least a couple superintendents.
Vice Chair Erickson, you have follow-up?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure what specifically that would be. We all understand low enrollment. I mean, it takes a lot to have a building, to have a minimum number of transportation. I think we all get that. But the more students you have, of course, the more money you get. If you have more students with specific needs, we have the weightings built into that. So I'm not sure I understand the rationale behind high density and the fact that currently you either are low or high. There's no in between. You're either low or high, and I'm not sure I understand the rationale for that, and I think that's something we need to really dig into. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Dr. Gibson, did you want to share a perspective? I feel free to say no. I just sitting here going, you have 7,500 students. Maybe you can shed a little light on that.
Yeah, and I have no way of knowing, excuse me, where the legislative prerogative was, right, for high density. I do know there's a lot of research, and I haven't read it recently, regarding cost analysis per student based on building size, which probably has a factor of district size in some cases, because a lot of districts of larger size also have high schools much larger, and it does cost a bit more, but I haven't seen the most recent research. I'm guessing that's where the grounding was initially, at least.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else, Senator? Okay, Matthew.
Madam Chair, Senator, so one of the findings in the West Ed study that was done in 2017-18 was that their findings were that as a school at some point started getting larger, you started seeing some of those costs increasing. So it was I believe they define it as a U-shaped curve. And so I believe that is where the suggestion of larger schools then also requiring some additional funding due to their size as well as low is where those numbers are, is obviously policy decisions.
Okay, that just kind of strikes me as a little counterintuitive, because I think about the more you can buy in bulk, the better rate that you get. But so I look forward to understanding that one better as well. Anything else for anybody on this? Seeing none, Jenny, if you want to go ahead and move us forward.
Okay, the final one is a combination of high and low enrollments. So this model 1.0 and 1.01 is slightly different than the other ones. So model 1.0 has no high enrollment and then a reduced low enrollment rolled into the base. So for this, base does increase because the funding is going from having an enrollment weighting to just rolling into base. And then, again, like I said, the high enrollment removed entirely. The low enrollment weighted FTE is, I misspoke. There is a reduced low enrollment weighting but it is reduced by the high enrollment amount. So it's reduced by subtracting high enrollment weighting multiplier from all the low enrollment multipliers. So basically, the multipliers, how do I say this in a way that does not sound even more confusing? We reduced the low enrollment factors, multipliers, by the amount of the high enrollment factor. And so there is low enrollment weightings. It is just lower than it is in the current model. And then USDs would continue to maintain previous low enrollment factors if they've accepted students due to school closures. And then there is no increase in the local option budget. So this would keep a low enrollment weighting and would roll money into the base for high enrollment. And this came out of a discussion in committee where the question was, what if we do something like this? And so that's where this one came from. Outside of that, I'm happy to stand for questions on that one, since I think I made it more confusing with my explanation. But it's basically taking part of the weightings and removing them and putting them into base, and then still maintaining a lower version of low enrollment.
And I think I'd call that an alignment. And alignment's an important concept in this process. Any questions for Jenny on what we've gone over so far? Okay, Jenny, go ahead and proceed.
Then the next three replace enrollment models entirely. They replace them with a density model instead of an enrollment model. Model 1.01 takes it with the median. And so that uses a density model with ranges that would mirror the transportation weightings models currently. And then it would utilize a factor similar to the capital outlay state aid. And so we'd take the median USD density and then have a range increasing or decreasing by steps. So when we talk about the AVPP and we say, here is what the percentage is, and then for each 1,000, it steps down or it steps up. Similar to that, that would be how the density ranges would work. Model 1.02 uses that density model using the median and then adds the difference to the base. So it looked at the difference between the new median density weighting and the current version of the low and high enrollment weighting and added that money into base. So that money was being put back into base and the funding amounts were staying similar. And then it would still have the density model as the new version going forward. So this is similar to a hold harmless discussion that has been had multiple times, or a step progression if you'd want to go in that direction where it could phase in this way, possibly. But that is what model 1.02 is. And then 1.03 uses the density model using the mean, not the median. But basically also still has those ranges and then has steps that increase or decrease based off of that. And so if you have not had a refresher on the transportation weighting, this may sound a little bit vague and confusing to you, but the idea was the density models would be built more similar to the transportation weighting as it currently stands with their density models. So that is the overview of the combined low and high enrollment. I know that got a little into the weeds there right at the end, but if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to talk about this or any of the other models we've talked about today.
Any questions for Jenny on this one? And any other questions on anything else as you've sat here and you've thought, and if something occurred to you about something we talked a little bit about ago, I want to give you a little time to go back and ask that question. Board Member Porter.
This isn't a question, but it goes back to the request that Senator Erickson made about enrollment. I represent, everybody thinks the small schools are in Western Kansas. I represent several. But at least a couple of them have virtual schools. And if you count those students, it's going to be a different number. So I wanted just to clarify that to make sure that, that we get the answer you want. Do you want the, because if you add the virtual to that enrollment, it's going to be significantly higher. And I'm assuming that what you want is the number of people that are actually in the brick and mortar building.
Senator, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I want the head count of without virtual.
So that might be confusing if we didn't clarify that up. So.
Thank you for asking the clarifying question. It shows the complexity of the riddle we have before us. Do we have any other questions for any of the topics that we've covered today? Jenny, thank you. You may have a seat. I don't see anybody left. Oh,
Just one thing with the worksheet I just want to touch on. The worksheet does also cover supplemental state aid and special education state aid in it, as well as the state foundation aid and the weightings we've discussed today. But I just wanted to let you know that it is not just state foundation aid that's in that worksheet for you to think about for tomorrow's discussion points.
Thank you very much. And I did have someone let me know they need to leave early tomorrow, so I am kind of trying to figure out how I can adjust the agenda, because I'd like to meet that request if I can. This is the last call for your payment vouchers. I have a thick stack, so I think I have everybody. Okay. On that note, we are adjourning 10 minutes early, which is, given how far behind we were before, I'm surprised, but that's Dr. Gibson.
Yeah, sorry, Madam Chair. And I don't want to be that one person ask questions at the end of class and hold everyone back, but I was a little unclear. I think there was a request made regarding perhaps the LPA study as well as Scott Frank's testimony, and it was cited, but will we receive a copy of that? I wasn't quite sure when it came to at-risk.
I believe they found it and are making copies, if I'm correct. Matthew, is that correct?
Madam Chair, we found copies of the LPA study. It is, I believe, around 300 pages, so it might be something that we seek to distribute electronically. We are looking at the other testimony and/or have found it. That one I'm not as up to date on.
Would a link be satisfactory?
That would be perfect. Thank you.
We will distribute it.
Okay, all those things will go out electronically. Thank you very much. Anything else for the good of the order? Jenny?
There were a couple of items that we said we were going to update on the overviews. We will send out any updated overviews tonight, so you'd have a chance to review those before tomorrow's meeting as well. So they should be minor tweaks, but do look for an email from us regarding that as well.
Last call for anything we need to. All right, then we are adjourned.